Such pictures are rare. It's 1909, and Leopold II, King of the Belgians, is watching a bicycle race. He reigns over one of the most prosperous countries in Europe. An ambitious and adventurous monarch, he will turn his country into a modern state. Under his reign, Brussels will be adorned with boulevards and palaces. He will also be the father of Congolese colonization. At the end of the 19th century, a great state had to have colonies to add to its wealth and influence. The great European powers were already in evidence throughout the African continent. Leopold II became the owner in his own right of a vast tract of virgin territory in the heart of Africa, having financed the expedition of the Anglo-American explorer, Stanley. These pictures, filmed by a Belgian colonist in the first half of the 20th century, reveal the splendors of this land. Its surface is rich in exceptional flora and fauna. Its inhabitants are divided into various tribes: Bantu, Bakongo, Baluba, Pygmies. Hundreds of others live on the territory of the Congo. Its soil conceals gold, copper, cobalt, diamonds. Uranium had not as yet been discovered. In 1908, King Leopold II, the Congo having cost him his fortune, bequeathed his African possessions to the Belgian state. The Belgian Congo was born, its surface area 80 times greater than that of Belgium. The Belgian system of colonization was step by step. Economic development was the first step. A major river port and roads and railroads that are regularly modernized would open the country to the outside world. The motor car would make its appearance in the bush. Fairly soon, domestic air links were being set up throughout the Congo. In 1925, at the behest of King Albert, the inaugural flight was arranged between the capital and the Belgian colony. Lieutenant Edmond Thieffry in the bowler hat, and the pilot Leopold Roger and the mechanic Jeff de Bruyker would attempt this odyssey. A journey which today takes only a few hours lasted 51 days. They arrived at Leopoldville, capital of the Congo, after 14 stages and more than 75 hours in flight. An epic indeed. But in general, the Belgians who tried the colonial adventure left the greyness of their capital by the maritime route. After a voyage of several weeks, the first contact with the colony was made at the port of Matadi, before plunging into the traditions and customs of the African continent. Exploiting abundant cheap labor made the fortunes of many Belgian entrepreneurs. The growing of latex, coffee or cotton was strongly encouraged. Teaching was an important aspect of Belgian colonization. The missionary fathers of various religious orders participated in this educational work among the black children. Belgian colonization sought to inculcate in the minds of the Congolese Western values and culture, to the detriment of the very fundamentals of African society. Christmas and Carnival became Congolese costume parties. At school, the children learned to disguise themselves as historic Belgians instead of their African forefathers.
It's a remote village in the middle of the rainforest in the Northern Democratic Republic of Congo. Amid the mud houses, this small church, Saint Emile, a Slovenian priest officiated here from 1992 to 2001. His name, Father Joseph, known as José by locals. Pierre Bobola remembers him well.
That house over there is Mr. José's house.
Pierre was 14 years old and one of his altar boys. In the evening after Mass, Father Joseph would often invite him into his house.
He would call me in. He would hold my hand, open the fly of his trousers and take out his penis. He would start touching himself, masturbating, and when he was about to ejaculate, he would tell me to hold out my hands. He would do that there, on the veranda.
According to several alleged victims, Father Joseph sexually abused dozens of young men, all of them minors at the time, in Moto. Some also accuse him of rape. Jean-Denis was only 16.
He would bribe us with small sums of money so that we would not say anything. He would give us clothes, sometimes soap. He also paid for my studies. He gave me money to go to school.
Like Jean-Denis, dozens of young boys in the village would get money from Father Joseph to study in the neighbouring towns of Bandaka and Bikoro. In Moto, many elders held the priest's generosity but knew nothing about the abuse.
He would give the altar boys money to go to school, and the boys would help him during Mass and walk around the village with him. I only found out what happened after the boys started talking. Before that, I had seen nothing.
In 2001, 2 alleged victims reported Father Joseph to the judicial police. The priest was charged with paedophilia, indecent assault and endangering state security. When questioned, he denied the accusations, but here's what the police officer concluded.
The allegations against Father José are founded insofar as he has special relationships with these young people outside the community.
Father Joseph never stood trial in the DRC. According to this former priest, the congregation of the mission in charge of the Moto parish had him returned to Europe as soon as possible.
The provincial asked me if I could go to Muto to meet Father Jose, so that I would pick him up at 3 a.m. and take him to Babanda. He didn't stick around, not even in Kinshasa. He was evacuated quickly.
Asked about Father Joseph, the congregation of the mission said he was never a member of the order and denied any link with the priest. The father of one of the alleged victims asked to reopen the case in 2021. At his request, the Congolese judicial police interviewed several alleged victims and their relatives. It concluded once again that Father Joseph should be brought before a judge. 20 years on, Claudine demands justice for her brother, who died in 2014.
We made this statement in 2021 because so far nobody has helped us. The priest is far away, so it's been complicated to initiate proceedings from here. In my testimony, I asked the government to do something. We've lost our brother.
Last year, 11 alleged victims also turned to Irish NGO Coping International to help them seek justice. The organisation passed on their testimonies as well as those of witnesses and relatives of deceased victims to the Vatican. The Archdiocese of Bandaka declined our request for an interview but sent us a statement in August. It reveals that an investigation was carried out by the Archdiocese under the supervision of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, the Vatican office that processes clergy sex abuse cases around the world.
At the conclusion of the investigation and after reviewing all the evidence, it has been considered that there are no elements that imply the guilt of the accused.
We were unable to find any more information on the investigation. The Archdiocese of Bandaka, the Nunciature in Kinshasa, and the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith did not respond to our request for details. But several alleged victims, some of whom had written to the Vatican, told us they were not contacted by the Church. Michel is one of them. He preferred not to give his full name.
I was expecting that, as it happened, people would approach us because we were first-hand witnesses, but nobody did. People who say that this man is innocent, I would like to confront them. I'm ready.
Vincent Doyle of Coping International believes this case shows that the Church is not yet ready to make itself accountable for clergy abuse.
The fact that not all victims were interviewed is reflective of how sexual abuse of minors and other types of abuse has been handled across the world. Not all countries, particularly developing countries, have not engaged in any implementation of safeguarding standards.
Earlier this year, a Slovenian journalist, Novike Mihajlović, tracked down Father Joseph. In an article published on the front page of Delo, he revealed that a civil case was filed by the church in Slovenia, but that the proceedings were dropped because the statute of limitations had expired. Father Joseph now works in the parish of Slivnica in his home country. He refused to answer our questions. Photos posted on his Facebook account and the parish's social networks show him posing with children. Meanwhile, the Maribor Archdiocese, to which he belongs, says it stands by the results of the Congolese investigation.
Did you hear those church bells in the audio segment just now? Oh, that was so pretty. I almost played it again. The Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. When we have the instrumental for Hail Mary on the Katherine Massey Book Club, 9 times out of 10, it's playing for child rape and the Catholic Church. I'm playing it. I'm playing it for the church bells. I'm playing it for the church bells, and they had the bells in the background in the Congo were the fathers raping children. Again, if you got a good memory for the Katherine Massey Book Club, I started doing this with the .22 caliber killings, I think, and it's just rolled from there. It's just continued because we've heard this before. So we got this in Buffalo, we got this in Louisiana, we got this in Brazil. We switching continents now. One more time for the Congo. That's just a smidgen. We've heard some more, but I mean everywhere we go with the Catholic Church, raping boys, raping girls. Today's date, Thursday, September 26, 2024. So I have been told, second installment, Andrée Blouin's My Country, Africa. We are picking up in my book on page 30, right in the midpoint. My mother had brought to the covenant. That's where we're picking up at. We heard 2 different audio segments at the beginning. The first was from the documentary film From Congo to Zaire. They talked about the Belgian invasion of the Congo and all of the resources, the cobalt and uranium. Real talk, they said at the time, uranium hadn't even been discovered yet. We don't even know how many bombs we can make with all of this. There are probably still resources in the Congo continent at large that we don't even know what we can do with this yet. But and the enormous discrepancy in terms of the size of the Congo and then the size of Belgium. Ant to an elephant metaphor. Anyway, so you hear about that. There'll be more details. They gave explicit detail about the first flight that took place from Belgium to the Congo colony. This is in 1925. Miss Blouin was born in 1921. Neely Fuller Jr. and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were both born in 1929. So to just kind of put that in perspective of things that were happening at that time period. They said specifically in the documentary From the Congo to Zaire that the missionaries of white supremacy, that they were there to inculcate the black Congolese children and people at large with ideas of Western culture, white supremacy, that were intrinsically, diametrically opposed to African values, African way of life, justice. That is all over the world, and that is like exactly where we are in the book right now, her being dumped at this orphanage with these so-called Catholic priests, nuns, sisters, all of that to do their devil work, really, religion of white supremacy, racism. And they said that they gave them all of these holidays of white supremacy, racism. They would go to school and they could pretend to be a white person. We're going to hear some of that specifically this week as well. Now, the next portion, that was a news report about the Catholic priests raping children in the Congo. Again, we've heard all of that before. When we picked this story up last week, Miss Blouin told us that her white father was 40 and her black Congolese mother was 13. Her raping white dad was watching her mother and her mother's teen child taking a bath together. Now, how widespread was this conduct from all of the white people participating in this racist colonial activity on the continent? Context. What does it mean to be white? What did I say last week? The whole world as the white man's brothel. We will get to it. Context of white supremacy, the Katherine Massey Book Club, My Country, Africa, audio segment 1.
My mother had brought to the convent, balanced on her head, a large basin filled with gari, a coarse meal that is ground from baked manioc. It is a staple of the African diet. Mixed with water, it is eaten as a paste, with a bit of salt during the meal, or with sugar as a dessert. It was a joy to me to have food that I could share with my friends, food brought by my mother on the boat, all the way from Bangui to Brazzaville. Now we could fill our stomachs together, and this would be my treat. It was the first time. During those long, happy hours in the courtyard, my mother never stopped kissing me and smoothing my cheeks. Sometimes she spoke to me in Sango, the language of my ancestors, sometimes in Lingala, the most common language in the Congo. She told me how proud she was of me, the child of a white man, her only child. She was touching in her love for my father, whose name she wore tattooed on her forearm as a part of the marriage ritual of our people. Although she had never aspired to being legally wed to her white man, my mother had wanted this tattoo. The chic with which my mother dressed made an impression on the other girls. Later they said to me, "Oh, your mother is so elegant, Andrée. She dresses with such coquetry." Not only was her visit a social promotion for me, proving that I was not alone, but my mother's own person drew the respect and attention of my friends. Suddenly I had something that I had never known. The next day, although such vanities were forbidden us, she brought me some of her talcum powder in a little piece of paper, enough to share with a friend. The brand was Cher Amy. Even now I can remember exactly how it smelled, and the sense of wonder it produced. Each morning she returned, in spite of the remonstrances of the Mother Superior. The nuns were vexed by the continued presence of this woman whom they didn't even know and who created a distinct agitation in the school. "It's only for a week," I begged, when the Mother Superior lectured me on the effect that these visits were having on the other girls. But since it was my father who had arranged for my mother's trip, there was no way that her visits could be denied. The days passed. My mother and I spent long moments sitting side by side on the bench, arms linked, holding one another. During the silences we often simply exchanged looks of tenderness. I basked in my mother's smile. The radiance of life was in that smile. In it one perceived life as a state of pleasure. I was astonished by this. After the sour, suspicious faces of the nuns, here was another expression entirely, one that proclaimed happiness as a natural state of being. When my mother laughed, which was often, Her teeth were sparkling white, and the timbre of her voice was that of a very young woman, gay and clear. It was the voice of a woman who was happy to find her daughter, and at the same time, of a light-hearted woman, one who had nothing great cares in her life. In spite of the fact that my father had abandoned her and deprived her of her child, Josephine expressed no resentment toward him. She spoke of him with a simplicity of affection that approached adoration. It was Henriette whom she detested and blamed for her heartaches. But for my father she seemed to feel only gratitude that he had given her the opportunity to come to Brazzaville and to show her love for me. What counted for her was her feelings for her child. It was because Josephine had created the row at the boat side that, until this visit, my father had refused her the right to see me. The police had actually been obliged to intervene on the dock and put Josephine in her place. According to the whites' law, a black could not be permitted to disturb the life of a European. When Gerbalat saw that this illiterate 17-year-old girl had no fear of him, a prominent white businessman, or of public opinion or the law, he knew she was capable of anything. He was afraid she might try to kidnap me from the orphanage. For this reason her movements were closely watched by the Brazzaville police commissioner. If she overstayed her visit or had been irregular in any way, she would have been put in jail. One sad day our visit drew to a close. With many tears we parted. I was not to see my mother again for 6 long years. After my father's appearance at the orphanage he showed a little more concern for me, and twice a year he sent a package of clothes. The dresses, as the nuns had asked him, were white, so I could wear them for the ceremonies on Corpus Christi Day. I was pleased with my dresses, but unlike my companions, I was not permitted to wear the traditional crown of white roses in my hair, as a symbol of purity. This was because of the mortal sin that I had committed with little Gaston at the age of 4. Chapter 3. Coming of age brings new terrors. I have often looked for reasons to forgive my father for placing me in the orphanage. I have tried to believe that, because he married a European woman, he had no alternative. Children like me had no place in a conventional European marriage or even in European society. To put his conscience at ease, he may have felt that he had to do something, and the orphanage seemed the least worst thing. There is no doubt in my mind that Henriette was behind the whole plot. She may have feared that as long as I was in the village my father would have an excuse to return there and spend time with Josephine. Once I was safely down the river, her husband, who now had his own transport business in Bangui, would no longer make those disloyal sorties back into the brush. They could arrange their lives as they pleased without being reminded of an unpleasant past. In yielding to this colonial psychology, my father also served to reinforce it, to perpetuate its evil. The children of mixed blood were a shameful stigma to this society in which the lines for blacks and whites were so clear-cut. That we existed at all was evidence of error in the ways of the infallible colonials. We therefore had to be separated from this society. With this miserable orphanage for us mixed bloods, the colonialists provided a means of controlling a potentially dangerous idea, that black and white could mix. It was therefore imperative to keep us shamed and humiliated in order to quench any spirit among us that might seem ready to draw advantage from this carnal association of black and white. The nuns, then, were given the job of molding our minds as well as lodging our young bodies. We were to be taught total resignation and submissiveness so that we would not in any way upset the precarious balance of the white man's ship on the already roiling waters of black discontent. It was necessary, however, that the institution preserve the air of a charitable spirit. Thus, the orphanage was to accomplish 2 purposes. While serving to perpetuate a racist society, it was also to be proof of the colonial's humanity. The orphanage had no interest in giving its charges a real education. Basically, we were formed to serve the whites on weekdays and to glorify the Catholic Church on Sundays. To those ends we were taught just enough French and manners not to offend those whom we would serve. There was hardly anything of an academic nature in our instruction, certainly not enough to earn a certificate of primary education. The nuns showed no concern as to whether or not a child was bright or interested in learning. What little reading and writing they taught us was mostly to enable us to learn our catechism. But even that we learned by rote, without an understanding of the ideas it contained. The few stories and vague ideas about the world that we picked up were based on religion. We learned Latin songs by heart, but we did not learn Latin as a language. Sewing was the one skill in which we excelled. We learned to sew marvelously because it was a prime source of revenue for the order. The older girls did the most refined embroidery, sheets, pillowcases, tablecloths, and napkins. These were sold at religious fairs in Africa and in Europe by the mother house of St. Joseph of Cluny. I became expert at making my own dresses when I was quite young. When my father came to visit me, he brought me 2 presents, a gold chain with my name on it, which was immediately put away to protect me from the sin of pride, and a large doll. It became my passion to make clothes for this doll, which I named Yas. This means little girl in Sango, my mother's tongue. Almost without help I began to design and cut out dresses for my doll, sewing and fitting them, although they let me play with her only twice a week. And if I wasn't good, the privilege was revoked. The doll was about 18 inches tall and of course, blonde. A doll with black skin was unthinkable then. When tilted back, she closed her eyes as if sleeping and said, "Papa, Mama." It made me terribly sad to hear my doll say, "Papa, Mama," as if she had a right to parents, while I did not. I felt sure that it was my stepmother who picked out this poisoned present for me. Although I could not take my doll to bed with me at night, or play with her when I wished, the fact that I possessed her was still something very special. The other girls envied me. They had nothing like the doll or like the chain with my name on it. But for me the 2 presents were a dreadful contradiction to the fact that I was so alone. I could not understand why my father had visited such cruelties on me. Mother Germaine was a wicked woman. Sometimes she stole our needles, just to create a condition for which she could punish someone. She was odious, wickedness personified. When she pinched me, she didn't just give me a tweak, but took a tiny piece of skin and twisted it harder and harder, looking at me with such sadistic intensity it was like a nail going into my heart. I couldn't invent the cruelties she concocted for us. Marie Cruzet, a gentle girl, wet her bed. It was a sickness. She had to have 2 children before she was completely cured of it. Mother Germaine put a potato sack on Marie's bed and during the night, of course, she wet it. The next day Marie was tied up in the sack stinking of pippy, with just her head sticking out, and they made her stand all day long thus, in front of the statue of St. Joseph. One day Mother Germaine told me to write on the blackboard J. Freudy. In an excess of earnest effort I pronounced it to myself Freud and wrote it that way. Mother Germaine slapped me. I ran and hid under her desk. She seized the chicotte that was always at hand and whipped at me awkwardly for some moments. I was so frightened my bladder emptied. I had to remain on my knees there, with what I had done, in front of everyone. I was so ashamed. Even today, when a strong emotion grips me or when I am afraid, it produces that reaction in me and I must run to the bathroom. This is Mother Germaine's legacy to me to this day. Another time she made me miserable with shame was when I had climbed up in a tree with some of my friends. Mother Germaine came and ordered us down at once. The others jumped to the ground, but I was clumsy. My dress caught on a branch and I found myself swinging upside down, unable to free myself. Mother Germaine clapped her hands and called the others to see me. My body was quite naked for we were not lucky enough to have panties then. There I hung, with my bare behind exposed horribly for a long time while Mother Germaine and the others pointed at me and laughed. Mother Germaine was not bad looking. She was tall and had strong, well-shaped eyebrows. Her lips were full. When she chose to, she had a pleasant smile. But her habitual expression was one of discontent and cruelty. She said she was attached to us, but this attachment was that of a vulture to its prey. With us she seemed to revenge herself for something denied in her own life. She especially detested me because she found in me a resistance that the other girls dared not show. When, as a punishment, she would demand, "Kneel," I would not do so at once. She would slap me. Still I would not kneel. 2 or 3 more times I accepted her slaps before I would slowly go down on my knees. Finally she would have her way. But I had the satisfaction of knowing I had resisted. My father sent me a dress and shoes. Mother Germaine gave them to another girl, Madeline, to wear, and Madeline flounced about in them, teasingly, in front of me. Children can be cruel. At such times I would ask myself, why am I living on this earth? I couldn't understand why I was suffering so much. I knew that I invited some of my problems by my stubbornness, but I simply could not give myself up to living joyously and easily the way some of the girls did. I was a reflective child. More than the others, I spent time alone thinking. When I was by myself, off to one side, Mother Germaine would say, "Look at that belle bêche, sitting there so proud, like a European lady." And Mother Germaine would sit down and cross her ankles and put her hands in her lap, mimicking me, while everyone burst into laughter. "Let's play Andrée" became a game to torment me. I had done nothing, I was just sitting there thinking, and they thought I was trying to act like a great lady. The daughter of Monsieur Gerbalat, Mother Germaine would mock me. But who was Monsieur Gerbalat to me, when I was so terrified of this unknown father that I could not even look him in the face? The second time my mother visited me at the orphanage was when she was on her way to Dahomey with her new husband, Joseph Mialou. They had been married in a church ceremony, as well as a civil one in Bangui. At that time my mother became a Catholic and was baptized, so that Josephine became her real Christian name. For a black man, Joseph Mialou held an exceptionally high post in the administration. He worked directly under the mayor of Bangui. However, he was not from our country. He had been born in Dahomey, which was known then for its educated blacks. It was colonial policy to place a black who was in a position of responsibility far from his home. This made him easier to manage, less likely to become a leader, and as such, a threat to the establishment. At that time, men were trained in Dahomey and then sent to distant corners of the French Empire as civil servants. Joseph had served a number of years at his post in Bangui and was now on his way home, on a year's leave, with his new wife. I found my stepfather a man of stately beauty. He had had smallpox as a child, and it had left deep scars on his face, but he was tall and straight, a man of presence. He possessed great dignity and commanded the respect of all who knew him. I came to love him very much. Joseph was a deeply religious man. When possible he would go to church 3 times a day. He was so inculcated with respect for the white man's law that it did not occur to him to go against my father's will. He saw how miserable I was in the orphanage, and this saddened him, but his advice was to take my troubles to God. It must be understood that at that time, in Equatorial Africa, no one from any institution, Catholic or Protestant, would have admitted that they mistreated the children committed to them. Today things have changed, but then the feelings of blacks, and especially of children, were not a matter worthy of consideration. We were little black creatures who, at considerable nuisance to themselves, they were saving from sin. If possible, we were to be turned into nuns like themselves. Joseph understood this mentality very well. He even said he would be happy to have me become a nun. "What?" my mother cried. "You want her to be one of those women? You want her to be like them?" The idea made her crazy. She began to heap abuse on him at the very thought. Joseph did not argue with Josephine about this or anything else. It was easy to see that he adored her. Adored her smile, her vitality, her easy, natural ways. It made me happy to see her with a man who esteemed her so much, and who gave her a respected place in society. With him, I thought, her life would be easy and pleasant. Joseph's goodness won me at once. He too wanted to give me a present. He bought me several little religious pictures. These he gave to me with an expression of affection in his eyes. By the time he left, I was deeply attached to him. My newfound happiness, however, was to become an arm against me. Later, when I would fall asleep from hunger and weakness at evening prayers, which went on for an hour or two, I would be wakened with a slap and the new threat, "We'll tell your stepfather." Thus Joseph's piety and my love for him were to become one more means by which the nuns could torment me. The Sunday after my mother's visit, I was permitted to wear my colonial helmet to Mass at the cathedral. Afterward the nuns led us on a promenade to the fields and woods just outside of Brazza. As usual, on this promenade, we were obliged to walk meekly, 2 by 2. When we got to the top of a little hill, the nuns seated themselves together to enjoy the view and the fresh air, and we girls were released to run about and explore. We were so starved that we could think of only one thing. Immediately we began to look for wild fruits to eat. If we could not find fruits, we would even eat mapansy, the young red shoots of a certain kind of bush. Greedily we would tear them off and chew them, like goats. The flavor of these leaves was good, something like oseals, sorrel berries, but they gave us dreadful diarrhea. We knew when we ate them that we would be sick, and have severe stomach cramps afterward, but still we ate them, just to fill ourselves for a little while. On this day I was delighted to find, in a little clump of trees, a nest of ambololo. This is a gummy fruit with a big seed. When ripe it is delicious, but when it is not entirely ripe the flesh is milky. I felt so lucky to have found this clump of ambololo. I wanted to gather them all, every one, to share with my companions. I did not intend to leave one behind, and so I used my helmet as a basket in which to pile the fruit. The nuns' whistles sounded, everyone returned and obediently got into line, 2 by 2, and here I came with my helmet full of ambololo, happy as could be. I was quite unaware that the milk of the bruised fruit was leaking into my helmet. Mother Germaine saw it and began to shout at me. My mother had left Brazza just that morning, which had made me very sad, but finding the ambololo had comforted me, and the prospect of sharing them with my companions was giving me pleasure. I couldn't imagine what the matter was now. As soon as I came within range, Mother Germaine landed 2 good slaps on my cheeks, then heaped me with reproaches. "What an impossible girl you are. There's no one like you. You will clean up your helmet the minute you get back to the orphanage. You don't deserve to have a new helmet or shoes. What are we to do with such a dreadful child?" We returned to the orphanage. My heart aching, I hastened to the laundry room. There I emptied all the wild fruit on the floor. In seconds they were gone. The same girls who laughed when I got slapped now snatched up the fruit and began to devour them. There wasn't even one left for me. But that was the least of my concerns. The crown of my helmet contained a puddle of the gummy milk and the sides were stained. I tried to pour out the milky substance, to wipe it clean with my fingers. This did little good. Finally I held it under the tap to let the running water rinse it out. Within seconds my helmet with the black band had melted into a shapeless mush. It was not made of cork, as are the real colonial pith helmets. It was just a junk imitation made for sale to the Africans. The material used was the fibrous pulp of sugar cane, molded and dried into the shape of a helmet, then covered with khaki cloth to look like the real thing. It would not have survived one hard tropical rain. There was a lesson to be learned from this disastrous parody of the white man's style. But as I squeezed the mushy lump in my hands I could think only of my grief. A new arrival at the orphanage was a source of great interest to us, for she was speaking the language of her mother and her impressions of the great world outside were fresh. Greedily we talked to her, learned all we could from her about her village and the life she had known. I thought about those unknown villages, tried to imagine the rivers and forests she had seen. I had been too young to remember my trip down the Congo, too stricken with the loss of my mother to care for anything else. The majestic Congo, although not far from our compound, we saw only from the distance. I dreamt of those other rivers of the interior with longing. I thought that in learning the African languages I could make mine the marvelous things that were denied to us in our life at the orphanage. The Kikongo and Lingala languages are very different in construction, although they have some common words since the two ethnic groups have often mixed. In these languages memories were evoked that would otherwise have been lost in the French of the orphanage. Whatever came from outside the orphanage, from Africa, I sought. It was a world to which I belonged but had been cut away. I felt I had to learn the contours of that life outside, and language was the means through which came my Africa. I groped for means to possess my heritage, to understand it, to make it mine. Everything that was of Africa became my passion. The nuns hid Africa from us. They refused it and forbade it almost as if it were something shameful. And the French they taught us was only enough to eke out a living as a seamstress for white ladies. We had no real access either to Africa or to France. When I was 15 years old I still had not begun to menstruate. This, doubtless, was due to my poor health. I was always so hungry and weak. Holding so much pain inside of me may also have had something to do with it. Then too, having eaten clay when I was young had completely wrecked my insides. I was long past the age of the other girls in the middle group, but still I was kept in that dormitory. One day some blood was noticed in one of the 4 tines that served as toilets for the middle group of girls. This was reported to Mother Imelda, who assumed that, since I was the eldest, I must have begun my period. She called me to her and began, in the most circumspect way, to question me. Since it would be an error to give ideas to a girl who had not begun to menstruate, she talked in such a roundabout way that it baffled me. In fact, it made me nervous. Never before had a nun spoken to me with such regard for my person. "My dear Andrée, it is quite natural, you know, to tell me, now that I am asking you, is it not so, if you have observed anything unusual, that is, anything that you would like us to know about, since all we wish to do is to help you." For some minutes she talked in these sickening circumlocutions. When I understood, finally, what she was referring to and what she was asking me, I saw it as the chance of my life. The girls of the middle dormitory were the most mistreated in the orphanage. It was they who had to do the most disagreeable work, like emptying the tines. It was they who were whipped the most and heaped with the most reproaches. The small girls could not do very heavy work, and the older girls were given a certain respect. They were treated less harshly. I had borne the treatment of the middle group for longer than most. I could not stand it any more. Now I saw my opportunity. God have pity on me, I thought. I am going to tell a lie. I can't stand any more of those whippings. I must get out of the middle group. Today is the day. The prospect of telling this outright lie increased my nervousness, and Mother Imelda saw it. "Don't be afraid, dear child, just tell me what happened. Your friend, Adele, who is one of the older girls, will help you." I dropped my eyes and put on a big act. "I can't talk about it to you," I said. Then, when I was alone with Adele, I said, "It's me." Adele told Mother Imelda, and such a fuss was made then. She got me a long, torn sheet of muslin and told me that I was to use this for a belt. Then she went pompously to get the 2 hygienic napkins that had been taken from me lest I think about them, and I was instructed in what to do. I was astonished at the amount of ritual involved in putting a little square fabric between one's legs. But when I came out of the infirmary, I was so proud, I looked at the other girls from the end of my nose. I had an entirely new status in the orphanage. I was over the hill of adolescence. I was at once assigned a bed in the dormitory of the big girls. From then on, I knew the nuns would not scold and whip me systematically and that my life would be easier. As a member of the older group, I could now give orders to the girls of the middle group as to a boy or servant. Go fetch me that. Do such and such for me. The middle girls did the same to the small girls and made them act as boy. We had our own hierarchy of power, even in our helplessness in that orphanage. But I still hadn't begun to menstruate, and when the time came for me to go into the laundry with the other girls to wash my linen, I was seized with panic. I went to the statue of the Virgin Mary and I knelt in front of her and prayed, "Oh, please, blessed Virgin, make me indisposed. I beg of you. Oh, please, please." I know I lied, but I had to. I couldn't stand it in the middle group any longer. Please intercede for me and make me indisposed, and I promise I'll wear these blue pads for the rest of my life. If you'll just make this miracle for me and make me indisposed. In addition to my fear of being found out, there was something else that troubled me deeply, and that was the way the girls in the older dormitory talked. The things they discussed, their breasts, their periods, their brasiers. Young girls were not allowed to know how a brassiere was made, and so the older girls were shut up in a special room when they made their brasiers. To speak of such terrible subjects, we middle girls had been told, was sinful. I was appalled at the number of sins these older girls were accumulating for themselves. Perhaps, I reflected, it was not sinful for the older girls to speak of those vile things, only for middle girls. But then, since I had not yet begun to menstruate and was not yet legitimately an older girl, had I the right to hear those things? Weren't those sins accumulating against me? My dilemma was dreadful. Terrified, I prayed for the Virgin Mary to make me indisposed, not only to save me from being discovered in my lie, but also to save me from God knew how many additional millions of years in purgatory, for hearing talk which I had no right to hear. Torn, miserable, I said to my friend Adele, "I'm so scared. How long does this take?" She said, "Don't be afraid, it's only for 3 or 4 days." In order to carry out my lie, I got some red clay, Brazzaville is built on red clay, and put a little of this on my blue squares when it was time for me to wash them in the laundry room. I would always leave a little trace on the cloth, so when I hung it up someone would say to me, "Andrée, you haven't rinsed yours well enough." I learned that this period was supposed to happen once a month, and acted out my role with aplomb. I even came to enjoy it. One could complain of cramps, I found, or a need to lie down. I regularly developed all the appropriate symptoms. It was marvelous, giving me such a sense of importance. For 6 months I deceived everyone, and then one day it happened. I did get my period. But it was not at all what I had expected. I was terrified because it was not blood, as they had said it would be, but a horrible, chocolate-like paste with lumps in it. I had dreadful cramps. I cried and cried in my bed, and finally they called a doctor for me. He said, "Why, the poor thing, it's her first time." What a scandal that made. I was obliged to admit that all those months I had faked it, I had not been menstruating. But the nuns could not do much to me then, because the doctor was involved. I admitted to him that the reason I lied was in order to get out of the middle dormitory where I had been so badly treated. The nuns had already experienced the results of my attestation to the authorities before, and they knew I was dangerous. The doctor saw, in fact, that I was very anemic and in need of medical care, which he insisted be given to me. But it was more than a year before I was to have a normal period. Mother Germaine never lost a chance to humiliate me, and the incident of the photograph at the waterfalls only served to exacerbate the violent feelings between us. When our dresses were torn or became too short, they were mended with a fabric of another color, whatever was at hand. In this institution, which depended on charity, we learned to get by with very little. I was about 16 when we were given the special treat of an excursion to Dieu to bathe at the waterfalls, about 5 kilometers outside Brazzaville. As we did not have bathing suits, we wore our pagnies, a long, simple garment that modestly covered us from neck to ankle. I had had my pain for many years and it had become much too short for me, so I added a piece of new material near the face as a kind of yoke on top. I thought it looked very nice. Monsignor Guichard, who was head of the entire mission, came to watch us in this great outing that was so special that it even included the black girls of the orphanage. He took a photograph of us while we were there. A week or so later, when Monsignor Guichard came to the orphanage for his regular, weekly visit, he brought with him his photograph of the occasion. When Mother Germaine saw the photograph, she called me to her and in front of all our 60 pupils slapped me so hard she knocked me to the floor. As I lay there, stunned, she shouted, "You lewd, shameless girl. Ever since you were a small child your filthy little mind has been bent on vice." I understood absolutely nothing of what she was saying. She called several of the older girls to look at the photo, brandishing it about as if it were the worst thing imaginable. When they saw it the girls began to exclaim, "Oh, oh. Look at Andrée." I was dragged to my knees. Mother Germaine was beside herself, she was a raging fury. "You did this horrible thing deliberately, you dirty little trollop," she shouted, and she showed me the black and white photograph. It looked as though I had nothing on top. "It's my pain," I tried to explain. "It's the light fabric. Your pain." Mother Germaine continued to rave. "You were absolutely determined to show off your breasts." "It's not true," I wept. "Go and get your pain," she commanded. My legs would hardly carry me as I stumbled back to the dormitory. Some of the girls followed, laughing, taunting me. Cruelty breeds cruelty. In that harsh microcosm unkindnesses fed on one another. When I brought my pain the truth was at once clear. The colored fabric began just below the bosom. My breasts looked as though they were bare because of the wet, clinging, lighter top. Even Monsignor Guichard asked Mother Germaine why she was so harsh with me. But the worst incident of all, in terms of its effect on me, took place the following Christmas. While she was on leave in France, Mother Germaine bought red belts for the girls of the orphanage. They were to be the presents that little Jesus gave us that year. When Christmas came I was in the infirmary with a serious case of malaria. For several days I had been in a crisis with a temperature, off and on, of more than 40 degrees centigrade. On Christmas Eve, as was the custom, the girls went to midnight mass at the cathedral in town. This was an event to which we all looked forward the whole year. Everyone wore white. A great basket of flowers was brought to the orphanage toward the end of our preparations and we entwined these flowers into crowns, with tiny veils of organza, to go with our white dresses. I always participated in the fête de Dieu with great hope and enthusiasm. It was such a beautiful occasion. The holy music, the incense, the crowds, the sense of expectancy at this celebration of our Lord's birth. For us it represented a new potential, another kind of life that might be lived in the marvelous freedom of the world outside. On this particular evening, of course, I could not go. The infirmary was next to the room of the girls in the middle group. While they were at the mass, I got up and saw that on each bed there was a red belt, waiting for their return. I went back to my bed and slept. Later I awoke, hearing them exclaim over their presents. At once I got up and looked around my bed, but there was no red belt for me. I was wild. With the little strength I had, in my fever, I pulled the cover off the bed and shook it on the floor. But there was no red belt. I must have screamed before I fainted. The nuns were summoned. I had hurt my face in falling and was seriously injured. But even before I was injured I felt as though I were dead, I felt death in my heart. Everyone had a red belt but me. Why? Why? I was given an injection to revive me. When I came to, I could smell the awful odor of chloroform, and I saw 3 nuns, in their voluminous dark habits, standing by my bed. My face was scorched with fever and my head ached where I had hit the iron bed and the cement floor. I could not understand why little Jesus, if he were a good person whom I was supposed to love, was so mean to me. But deep inside I also knew that it was Mother Germaine who was behind little Jesus, and that it was because of her that there was no red belt on my bed. I looked up at these nuns who scared me so much, and I began to cry. Mother Germaine took my hand and smoothed it, saying, "You did not look in the right place, you must look under your pillow." I lifted the pillow, and there was a red belt, which of course had not been there before. When I fainted, the nuns saw that they had made a mistake, that what they had done was too serious, and that I was really affected. They only gave me the red belt because they feared that I was going to die. But I knew very well that they had played a trick on me, and that they had not intended for me to have a present like the other girls. They said to me, "It's yours. You see, you too have a red belt, you can wear it on your nightgown." But I could not bear the intent of their terrible deception, and I never once wore my red belt. Besides Christmas, there were 2 other events that gave a new purpose and a new breadth of emotion to the stupefying sadness of our days. The marriage of one of our girls was an occasion, but even this was not always happy for us. Often we cried as we stitched our friend's trousseau because she was leaving. The other event that gave us something to look forward to with pleasure was the town kermesse or fair. The kermesse was a great festival for the whole town of Brazzaville. It was the one secular event in which the orphanage took part. Both the whites and the Africans who had money to spend looked forward to it each year. There were games and stands with homemade articles and delicious-smelling foods for sale. Above all, there was a sense of excitement, of a rare and special event. For us girls it was a chance to taste of the real life, unpredictable and exhilarating, that went on outside our walls. At the orphanage stand we sold the tablecloths, napkins, cushion covers, bed linens, and curtains that we had been embroidering all year. Because of the exquisite work that we were selling, our stand was the most admired of all. We worked behind the display tables, spreading out the articles and showing them to potential customers. We found it marvelous to mingle with the people of the town, to observe them, and speak with them, as never before. Although of course a nun was always present, watching closely, and this mingling was never allowed to go very far. The black girls of the orphanage were not permitted the privilege of speaking with the customers. Even in this great feast, the black girls were discriminated against by the nuns. The kermesse began on a Saturday at noon, after we had spent the morning in setting up our stand and laying out our wares on it. Saturday afternoon was for whites only. After they had picked over what they wanted, the blacks were admitted in the evening. Sunday was for everyone who had money to buy. The climax of the kermesse, on Sunday evening, was a hiddle show, staged by the girls of the orphanage. It was a simple affair, a few dances, songs, and sketches based on European themes. Usually they were patriotic numbers saluting our ties with France. The show was held in our main hall. Even the mayor of Brazzaville attended. Among those present, also, were the town matrons who became patronesses of the orphanage by giving some of their old clothes to the nuns for the girls, and the Portuguese merchants who donated our sickening food. Part of the evening's program was the presentation of prizes for sewing and embroidery. These prizes were very simple indeed, a little colored picture of Saint Joseph or of the Virgin Mary. Still, they brought us great happiness. Sometimes we were even given 1 or 2 pieces of candy. How spoiled we felt then! All year long we worked like slaves, doing the most beautiful embroidery we could, in order to earn a piece of candy or a little printed religious picture. I still remember with pleasure the little performances we put on at the kermesse because it brought the girls' families to see them. We could look out from our stage and see the gathering of faces. It was like a great bouquet of human flowers. In front, of course, were the white patrons and patronesses, then the other white people, and in the back, the smiling black faces of the mothers with their brightly colored scarves tied upon their heads. We were so happy to have them there. The girls wrote letters weeks in advance to their mothers to make sure they would come. They wanted to be sure we would have their eyes and their smiles. Our joys in those days were so thin, it was a great occasion for us to have the mothers at our show. Nanette, who was 2 or 3 years older than I, was my best friend. The thing I esteemed about her was that she was not at all machard, a tattleteller, like some of the girls who were always seeking to improve their own position with the nuns by telling a story about someone else. Nanette had very soft and smooth black hair, and golden brown eyes. She seemed to be a girl without problems, with a kind and calm disposition. I could tell my sorrows to her, and when I cried, she consoled me. Her black family often came to visit her, and I think this gave her strength. When they brought her fruit, she would share bites of it with me. My first communion, with several of the other girls, was to take place in the town cathedral. Since I had no shoes, Nanette lent me her espadrilles. When I tried them on, I found that there were holes on the side through which my small toes stuck out. Carefully I sewed patches of cloth over the holes, and then to conceal the patches, I applied a chalky paste used for white shoes, called bianco. The first coat made them look better, so I put on another and then another until the espadrilles became very stiff. The cathedral was packed with people, the whites in the center section and the blacks on the sides. They were not permitted to sit together. We who were to make our first communion were to walk down the main aisle before this great crowd, with our prayer books in our hands and our eyes cast down. For 8 days I had already been looking down because we were in retreat to prepare us for this event. Now, as we started down the big aisle, I lowered my eyes. To my horror I saw that the bianco had cracked and fallen off and my patches had given away. Anyone could see that my shoes had holes in them. I was dreadfully humiliated. As I walked I bent my knees and pulled my white dress down, trying to make the skirt hang lower so those sad shoes would not be seen. The orphanage uniform was a very plain navy blue dress with a belt of the same fabric, and a small white collar. We took 1 bath a week. 1. The big girls were separated from the small girls for the baths, but even the big girls were prevented from seeing one another's bodies. The actual washing was done under one's pain, by sponging ourselves out of a basin of water. The soap we used was made in a big pot at the orphanage out of palm oil, caustic soda, and indigo. It smelled terrible and gave us rashes. In each dormitory there was a girl who was responsible for the soap, which was rationed, like our needles. To be sure that nothing untoward happened during the bath, such as one girl seeing another girl's breasts, or touching ourselves too long in the soaping, a nun was stationed with us to watch and see that all was correct. Of course, while walking to the cathedral in town one might see a black woman with her breasts exposed, or nursing a child. But that was not the same as seeing the body of one of our friends. It was not until I was a grown woman that I understood what all that fanatic modesty was about. At the time I was too stupid or innocent to understand what it was the nuns feared. I noticed, without grasping why, that whenever 2 girls were known to be by themselves, the nuns became agitated and began to search for them, as if something dreadful might happen. This happened to me, when I was with a friend, on several occasions. When one of the orphanage cats gave birth to a litter of kittens in the loft, it gave me great pleasure to discover the nest. Fascinated by the babies, I would take Maria or Nanette with me to play with them, whenever we could. Abandoning ourselves to our fancies, we would kiss and fondle the downy little ones. We pretended we were their godmothers, we baptized them, giving them names. Such were the childish inventions with which we reheaved our days. At once a nun would come looking for us, to see what we were doing. It was only much, much later that I learned about girls loving each other. Yet the evidence was before me. I remember that on 1 or 2 occasions one of the girls made what must have been an overture to me by touching my breasts. She lifted them up with her 2 hands, saying in an admiring tone, "My goodness, Andrée, your breasts are so high and well shaped." Today I know it's unthinkable to be so innocent. Children of 12 already know about the life of the senses. But we, or at least I, did not know then what it was.
A variety of pygmy groups can be found in Cameroon, Gabon, the Central African Republic, Uganda, Rwanda, and the 2 republics of the Congo. The silence of these forests was broken by the madness of a royal psychopath in one of the most horrific genocides in modern history. In the late 1800s, the bloody claws of King Leopold II of Belgium had their merciless way with the entire population of the Congo. It is thought that more than 10 million people died in a period of 23 years. There was a systematic and indiscriminate exploitation of natural resources, including rubber and ivory, for which indigenous labor was used exclusively in conditions of extreme slavery. Mass slaughter was not uncommon, nor was the burning of villages, or punishment by example in the form of torture or the mutilation of hands and legs. The genocide under Leopold II was quite possibly the worst in history. The pygmies, who by nature are docile, social, and not at all aggressive, were forced to defend themselves. They formed large groups to combat the slave trafficking brigades of the Belgian king. They were so well adapted to their environment that their capture was quite difficult. In fact, the proportion of pygmies captured with respect to Bantus was quite small. Slave hunters had a hard time moving through the tangled thickets of the rainforest. The pygmies were difficult to find, seemingly able to make themselves invisible. They moved quickly over terrain that was full of obstacles for the slave traffickers. In this sinister era, the American Samuel Phillips Werner bought 9 pygmies from a group of slave traders and brought them to the World's Fair in St. Louis. This marked the beginning of the story of Autobiography, who was sent to the Bronx Zoo when the expo ended and exhibited in the monkey house with an orangutan. In response to the outcry of churchgoers and moralists, Autobiography was freed. But several years later, he took his own life with a revolver. Knowing he would never return to Africa was more than he could bear.
Katherine Massey Book Club, context of white supremacy. So we just got a little extra snippet that is from the documentary film. Make sure I give the full up. Oh man, I messed up the oh, there it is. Did we get it? Did we get it? The Agony. There we go. Got confused about the title. Pygmies, the Agony of the Green God. That is the documentary that was just talking about King Leopold being a psychopath. Haven't we heard that term before in the Katherine Massey Book Club, even recently? And then Autobiography, who I remembered last week, like, man, I thought, how are we going to talk about colonization in the Congo, and especially this time period, and we can't get a brief shout out to Autobiography. He's been referenced before on the program. Really important, and like I said, it would be exactly this time period, early 1900s, stolen from the Congo, part of the so-called pygmies, very small black people, and put in a zoo in the U.S., ends up committing suicide. Blame white people for that, knowing he's just been terrorized and is not going to be able to get back home and see his family and relatives and all the rest of it. He'd be like Andrée Blouin, even if he was, so same difference. But Autobiography, if you don't know who he is, there are lots and lots and lots of books on him, and documentaries, and in fact, even current events, because in Virginia, another worthless Negro in the Commonwealth, in Virginia, I think he ended up going there. I think he ended up being in a mental institution, if my memory is correct, in Virginia, and they did some lame, tacky apologies about all of this sometime recently. Any hoodles. Katherine Massey Book Club. If you have commentary to share, the number 605-313-5164. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email untiljustice@gmail.com. untiljustice@gmail.com. If you have thoughts, observations to share. Let's see. We have folks who wrote in to decide. We'll do email, and then I don't know. We'll do email, then we'll have folks commentary dialed in via the phone line. Let's see. Email number 1. Greetings, Gus, listeners, and callers. Sorry I missed the interview on Tuesday regarding swimming pools, in Columbus County, North Carolina. I have a number of relatives from Whiteville, many of whom still live in the area. Columbus County has been mentioned previously on the COWS compensatory call-in. See Sheriff Jody Green, who was taped saying racist slur. Sheriff Green resigns. This is from early last year, 2023. Chapter 2 from My Country, Africa, page 31 to 32. For this reason, her movements, meaning Josephine, Andrée Blouin's mother, her movements were closely watched by Brazzaville Police Commissioner. If she overstayed her visit or had been irregular in any way, she would have been put in jail. Wow. Surveillance state. Constant surveillance of non-white victims is mandatory in order to maintain the global system of racism, white supremacy. She is the authentic biological parent, as they say. Get on out of here. Chapter 3. Have often looked for reasons to forgive my father for placing me in an orphanage. Thanks, Gus, for reminding us of Essie Mae Washington Williams. We did read her autobiography, which I thought was great. Dear Senator, I said last week, this reminds me so much of that book, specifically exact same power dynamic, victim of white supremacy, who is the offspring of child rape with a white father. And I said it's almost verbatim, where she's talking about her child raping white dad as though this is some sort of a romance, and maybe they could be going out on safari together. Essie Mae Washington Williams, maybe her parents could be hanging out in New York together and go to a little coffee shop, get a little tea and a latte, and go see a film. Like, what are you talking? She's not even of age to go to the bar, man. Come on. Jiminy. 2. With the miserable orphanage for us mixed bloods, the colonialists, racists, provided a means of controlling a potentially dangerous idea that black and white could mix. Shamed and humiliated we were. Not sure this is an accurate interpretation. Did it decrease the rape of black children? No. So confusing trying to understand the thinking and motivations of suspected racists. I was thinking the same thing in that passage, like, I do not know, or at least it wasn't explained to me, what is dangerous about a white person having sexual intercourse with a non-white person, particularly a white man raping a child. I don't know what's dangerous about that, dangerous to whom. All that would have to be explained. Even when you say mix, do you mean sexual activity? Is that what you mean? I certainly haven't seen how that's done. Like, was it dangerous for your mother or dangerous for your dad? All this tragic arrangement. Whom was this dangerous for? Leave it there. 3. The orphanage had no interest in giving its charges a real education. We learned to sew marvelously because it was a prime source of revenue for the order. orphanage, more accurately a slave plantation, like real talk. That's what this here thing is. Lucky they didn't send you off down in the mining shafts, get that cobalt. 4. The doll was about 18 inches tall and, of course, blonde. See Dr. Mamie and Kenneth Clark's controversial doll study, how a psychologist's work on race identity helped overturn school segregation in the 1950s. Well, it didn't really get overturned because it's worse now than it was then. So, 5. Mother Germaine was not bad looking, blinded by white skin, as we are, and the beauty standards for sure. But she does emphasize how hideous she was because she's dedicated to racism. Like all she's doing is just going around and pinching people and mistreating people and looking for reasons to lash. And what is it? The cachet, however you say it, the whip. Where is it at? Got to do some lashing. Yeah, yeah. That does make you look real ugly. You can be the finest person in the world, supermodel. You're just going around lashing and practicing racism all day long. Starving children, forgot about that. 6. It was colonial policy to place a black who was in a position of responsibility far from his home. This made him easier to manage, less likely to become a leader, and as such a threat to the establishment. Racial showcasing, for sure. I also think what is significant here, this is a cute, precise detail to managing the plantation. We've even heard this before, where white people, racists, they have told other white people, uh-oh, we got some unruly niggers. They're uppity. They might be a little bit educated. Maybe we let them go to school, something of that nature. We can't pool all of them together. Could be, as they deemed, and there is a danger. I understand that part. That's logical. Could be danger. Could leak to our other niggers. Mess things up. This could be contagious. Might decide he wants to take charge and have a strike or union or walk out, anything. All that stuff is that dangerous. Raping children, we can deal with that. But they get to all this about we're going to move. I remember this specifically with the Port Chicago mutiny because we just discussed that. That's here on the other side of the planet, on the West Coast where I am in California. They said the same thing. We had Professor Robert Allen as a guest on the program. He wrote the book by that exact name, Port Chicago Mutiny, where he said that's what white people hear. And this is like 20 years after the period that we're talking about. Like, whoa. When you get uppity niggers like this, who are talking about they're going to protest and we're going to have safer practices and we don't like the way you're practicing racism and mistreating black people, whoa, disperse them. You don't want to pile all these folks up in the Bay Area. Send one to Wisconsin. Send one to Minnesota. Send one to Florida. Send one to Iowa. We break that up, send them out, far away. You take Neely Fuller Jr., we send him to Alaska. He said, they stationed him in Japan. Disperse them far out. That way they won't, and they particularly won't be around any of the people that they had contact with growing up. So it won't be like, oh, we remember you already, get down, we got a report. Nap. You are a stranger, and in fact, maybe you don't even speak the same language. That's not ignorant. That is high-level, sophisticated management of the plantation. Same way that they keep tabs on the mother, like make sure what's she doing, but put her in jail. Right. And she was 17, right? How much is an uneducated 17-year-old? How much damage could they do? Just saying. Uncle Douglas, 7. My mother was so proud that I was fair. Haven't we heard that word a lot this week? We've been broadcasting almost every day except for Monday. Man, especially the white guests, they've been using that word fair. My mother was so proud. Not black and proud. Fair and proud. That I was fair, so obsessed. What a word choice with having a child of a white man. Is it that uncommon? I'm just asking. I mentioned dear Senator, right? Thomas Jefferson. Is it really that uncommon? A child with one non-white parent, one white parent. With one non-white parent, one white parent. Is it that uncommon? One white father. Is it that uncommon? All the Eurasian, the whole world as the white man's brothel. Is it that uncommon? And even, in fact, that dear Senator Essie May, she said that her mother, they talked about her skin complaint. In fact, they would deposit the children of the plantation. She said that in Dear Senator. These are like one and the same books. She said they would deposit them at the HBCUs in South Carolina or in the South, a lot of which, most if not all of which, are named after white people. They would just throw them there because we got to do something with all these little throwaway children. What are we going to do with them? We'll put them at the Negro colleges and send them a little money, discreetly, of course. But she said, Essie May, that her black mother would say, oh man, once you get older, ooh, they going to love that skin. It's fair. You so light. You don't have that melanin. Got that nice white raping father. Child raping white father. Obsessed, back to our text now, with having a child of a white man, that she found it absolutely indispensable that I protect my face from the sun. Whew. Stunning. This reminds me of Asada a little bit too. We read that. I told you we are the biography kings. Wow. That is stunning. Now, I will say, if you have less melanin, you have less protection from the sun. Certainly, you're in equatorial Africa, for sure. You had better get some sunblock. Maybe even everybody. You need to protect your skin because, wow, that sun can be intense there. But if you have less melanin, yes, you will have less protection. You will need to protect your skin in the sun, for sure. But not all this, ooh. Even Pam talked about that, didn't she? Pamela Evans Harris, Beauty Con Game, said all that. That's one thing to do. Don't sit around and talk like that, and especially not in front of your children, any of them. Ooh, you got that good hair. Ooh, you so pretty. Oh, you so like, look at your skin, it's so pretty. Don't you hear them saying that just because they got one white parent, and then the rest of it, oh, you got that old nigger naps and just dark as your daddy. Don't you do that, because apparently we've had generations of that all over the world, courtesy of racist man, racist woman. Let's see. My mother, we already read it. White identification, I didn't even read what he said. White identification is such a powerful force in the global system of racism. White supremacy, Pam talked about that concept all the time. It's in the Beauty Con Game. Facts. 8. My helmet with the black band had melted into a shapeless mush. It was not made of cork, as were the real colonial helmets. It was just a junk imitation made for sale to the Africans. Melted colonial helmet seems like an apt metaphor for what it means to be a victim of racism, white supremacy. I was even thinking of the cork. That is used for the blackface and all of that when they go to blacken up, same time period and all the rest of it. Any hoodles. 9. Mother Germaine, in front of all 60 pupils, slapped me so hard she knocked me to the floor. When I fainted, the nuns saw that they had made a mistake. They feared I was going to die. I never once wore my red belt. Cruelty knows no limits. Can't say that enough as well. And just terrorizing children. We see so much of that, like just going to do things to terrorize and abuse you for no reason. Like they steal your needle just so they can make up a reason to abuse you all the time. 10. Her black family often came to visit her and I think gave her strength. This was not an orphanage to me. Seems like a lot of these mixed children had families, true, who could take care of them, including the author, true. Slave plantation, prison, concentration camp seems more accurate. Should it also be considered a child trafficking operation? That, I think, is an excellent point, because it's not like her black mother signed off on this, like, oh yeah, this would be best for her and all the like. No, her mother was furious about this, heartbroken about this, ready to fight the whole world. Remember about, that's why the police got to keep an eye on her. Like, she might try and steal her back and all the rest of it. So absolutely, this is not an orphanage. Absolutely correct terms. An orphanage suggests you don't have parents, you don't have people who want to take care of you, that you've just been abandoned or given up or whatever. And that is the total opposite. These folks have been stolen. It seems like have people who would give anything and fight and brawl and die to get them back in their custody. Oh no, get on away from round T. I want to say Nigra, but they don't say Nigra in the retract. Maybe they do say Nigra in the Congo. Actually, I got to retract all that. They called Patrice Lumumba in the Congo a Negra. And they got the receipts for that in Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat. That was one that I had to write in the dark. What? But they called them a Negra, so retract all that. They do. I told you, they gave the impression that the Negras is Negras. Even Patrice Lumumba. Whatever. Anyway. Let's see. Last one. There's one more from this section. I noticed without grasping why that whenever two girls were known to be by themselves, the nuns became agitated and began to search for them. It was only much later that I learned about girls loving each other. I think those nuns were probably engaged in a lot of anti-sexual behavior amongst themselves. That's why they were so suspicious of the girls. Facts. Say it 15 times. Why did I play that audio at the beginning of the day? I never played the Tupac for the book club. I said 9 times out of 10. I don't play Pac just because it's September, so we got to remember when Pac was slain. That is important for counter-racist purposes, but that's not why I play it. The bells for the Catholic Church. They doing all this raping. Her dad included. They doing all this raping. You heard a lot of boys saying they were raped by Catholic priests, which we've heard before. So, I mean, give me a break. You concerned about some carnal? Get these white men from watching these children take a bath. How about that? You can start there. I mean, don't be touching children. Get out. The racist hypocrisy of it all, man. Lost you. And again, these are children. You stole them to rape and starve them. That should be emphasized like every day. These are children that were stolen to be raped and starved. Not that it would be better if they were children that didn't have families and all the rest of it, that had just been dumped on the side of the road type thing. It would be no better. Maybe worse in that circumstance, but really, these are people that were absolutely stolen. I could be home chilling with my family, getting fat, eating good. You got me out here starving, eating bricks, man. What that? White people do not care about children. Apparently that's global. Much obliged. The email untiljustice@gmail.com. Let's see. Folks who dialed in, they have commentary to share. Lauren should be with us. Nab other hands as we proceed. Let's see.
Yes, sir. Good evening. Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to speak. The first part I noticed, and it was kind of a question I had from last week, it said she was touching in her love for my father. She's talking about her mom, whose name she wore tattooed on her forearm as a part of the marriage ritual of our people. Although she had never aspired to being legally wed to her white man, my mother had wanted this tattoo. So I guess that answers the question. I guess they weren't legally so-called married. It was just a marriage ritual. Let me see. It said each morning she returned in spite of the remonstrances of the Mother Superior. The nuns were vexed by the continued presence of this woman whom they didn't even know and who created a distinct agitation in the school. It's only for a week, I begged, when the Mother Superior lectured me on the effect that these visits were having on the other girls. I wonder what she said the effect was. But since it was my father who had arranged for my mother's trip, there could be no way that her visits could be denied. So, since this white man had said she was coming, then they couldn't really do anything about it. Let me see. The previous email, I think, talked about it, but it said it was because Josephine had created the row at the boat side that until this visit, my father had refused her the right to see me. The police had actually been obliged to intervene on the dock and put Josephine in her place. According to the white's law, a black could not be permitted to disturb the life of a European. When Gerbalat saw that this illiterate 17-year-old girl had no fear of him, a prominent white businessman, or of public opinion or the law, he knew she was capable of anything. I guess they didn't come in on that part exactly, but I thought that was super interesting. It was like, okay, she's not acting the way I expect in this situation. So in other situations, she might do it too. When they were talking about Corpus Christi Day, that's a town, city in Texas. This is the first time I actually thought what Corpus Christi actually means. That has to mean body of Christ. Let me see. The nuns were given the job of modeling our minds as well as lodging our young bodies. It was necessary, however, that the institution preserve the air of charitable spirit. Thus, the orphanage was to accomplish two purposes. While serving to perpetuate a racist society, it was also to be proof of the colonial's humanity. I missed a part there. It said we were to be taught total resignation and submissiveness so that we would not in any way upset the precarious balance of the white man's ship on the already roiling waters of black discontent. That part was super interesting to me. When she gets the doll, she starts sewing the clothes and stuff, but they said if she wasn't good, then she was only allowed to play with the doll like twice a week. And if she wasn't good, the privilege was revoked. I thought that's what a privilege is, something that can be taken away. It made me think about white people saying white privilege. Let me see. She said Mother Germain was a wicked woman. Sometimes she stole our needles just to create a condition for which she could punish someone. She was odious, wickedness personified. When she pinched me, she didn't just give me a tweak, but took a tiny piece of skin and twisted it harder and harder, looking at me with such sadistic intensity, it was like a nail going into my heart. And the pinch, that must have hurt, but it seemed like what really hurt her was the look in her eyes. That made me think about this other book I read called A Very Private School. I think the person's name was Richard Spencer. But anyway, he talks about the abuse he experienced at one of these, I don't know, it was called a boarding school. So, and maybe that's what this could be called too, just a boarding school. Let me see. When the day Mother Germain told her to write something on the board, she told her to write, it looks like Jean Freud. I don't speak French. And she said she tried to pronounce it to herself and she wrote Freud. And then she wrote that on the board and Mother Germain slapped her. I couldn't figure out what that meant. I was wondering if it meant like fraud or fake or something like that, but I don't know. I couldn't figure that out. And then she scared her, so she got the chicote and she peed on herself. And she said, she was really ashamed. And even today, when a strong emotion grips me or when I'm afraid, it produces that reaction in me and I must run to the bathroom. This is Mother Germain's legacy to me to this day. It's pretty terrible. There was another part. she said, I knew that I had invited some of my problems by my stubbornness, but I simply could not give myself up to living joyously and easily the way some of the girls did. I was a reflective child. Reflective, that's an interesting word because it kind of means for light to refract off of one thing. Anyway, more than the others, I spent time alone thinking. When I was by myself, off to one side, Mother Germaine would say, look at that Bella Beige. I really couldn't. Belle means like a pretty girl, and beige, Googled that, and it seems to mean spade. Sitting there so proud like a European lady. And Mother Germaine would sit down and cross her ankles and put her hands in her lap, mimicking me, while everyone burst into laughter. Let's Play Andrée became a game to torment me. I had done nothing. I was just sitting there thinking, and they thought I was trying to act like a great lady. And I think that was super important because people classified as Black are not supposed to do a lot of thinking. I also wondered if that's why you played that particular Neely Fuller Jr. segment ahead of today's broadcast. Yeah, we're not supposed to think. Other Black people will make fun of you, and white people will watch you. They will put you under serious observation if it seems like you're doing some thinking that you're not supposed to be doing. And even right there, like making fun of a child, that's, you know, it's almost as hurtful, if not more hurtful, than just giving them like a physical type punishment. Let me see. Oh, she likes her stepfather, and the nuns somehow, they use that against her. It's just like everything, all information is taken to be used against you. Everything these white people know is going to be used to punish you. I was kind of glad, though, when the mom found out, like, she had a cousin who came to the school, and the cousin told her mom that she wasn't eating properly. They were, like, starving, and they said that she told her that Mother Germaine whips her constantly. And, her mother took off her camisole and, gave that lady a couple of punches. That actually, I was pretty glad about that because I think that Mother Germaine did need some punishment. She should not be mistreating children in this manner. Let me see. She says the nuns hid Africa from us. They refused it and forbade it almost as if it were something shameful. And the French they taught us was only enough to eke out a living as a seamstress for white ladies. We had no real access either to Africa or to France. That seems to be a pretty common condition of Black people, period. Especially the ones who have been brought to other places in the world. The period thing, having to fake that to get out of that section she was in, the middle section. This whole thing, it was like so many highlights I made in this section. They go to the waterfalls. First off, her little, I think they called it a pagni, her little nightgown type of thing was too small, so she had to add fabric to it because it was so short. And then, they took a picture, then she gets slapped so hard she's knocked down. It's just they don't get to bathe enough. She said 1 time a week. And then that wasn't even a bath. That seemed like some kind of just a wash-off. And it wasn't just a regular wash-off either. It was some kind of other chemicals involved that gave them rashes and things like that. I don't know. I don't want to talk too long. I feel like I've said a lot of stuff, but yeah, all the things they're going through are super disturbing, and that's all I have now.
Much obliged, Lauren. Did you think of a term to call the child-raping father, Andrée Blouin's father, what to call him other than father, dad? It's another name?
I guess we could just say progenitor. How is that different from father? progenitor just means you're the person who produced this other person. Father implies more of a relationship in my mind.
I see. Progenitor. Okay. At least we do have an option to father. Brace soldier. Mother superior is in the word guide, or excuse me, father superior. That one is in the word guide, I believe. Any hoodles. I looked it up. I do not speak French either. Still struggling with English after all these years. I did search for J.I. Freud. I think that's it. J''AIFROI. I think was the term. I think that means I'm cold. From what I looked up, which would kind of fit with if this is supposed to be the English lesson and they're just getting rudimentary. That's what she's supposed to write on the board, and I guess she didn't say it correct. Oh yeah, because she said she didn't. She I guess said FOU-ROID, which I guess is not Freud. Yeah, I guess that's not how you say it. And so that's, where's the Chicote? Got to get that. That's probably not how you say that either. But anyway, that's what it's supposed to mean. J.I. Freud. I have to get the pronunciation so I can say it correctly. Again, now I'm guessing. I think her name is Andrée Blouin because it's got the accent mark over the first E. So that's my guess, but it could be totally wrong. Might not even be the correct way to say her last name either. She talked about Corpus Christi and said this is the first time. Lauren, this is her first time recognizing that Corpus Christi actually translates to body of Christ. Apparently you did not watch one of the films on Neely Fuller Jr.'s list. I thought of immediately when we got to that segment, Trip to Bountiful. This is one of his films he raves about, I guess I'll say, on a pretty regular basis. This is 1985 film that is about an old white woman who wants to go back to the house where she grew up in Texas, and she lives with her son and daughter-in-law, and they dress just these three white people basically the whole movie. It's a real old people movie. Neely Fuller Jr. would love it, of course, but they have a scene where they mention that specifically, Corpus Christi, and this is one of the scenes where they are talking about it's not even non-white people in the movie, but they are talking about non-white people, racism, white supremacy, and they mention Corpus Christi, and they even break down the phrase Corpus Christi. That means the body. When I heard that, I said, I could have played that as a sound clip. That would have been so pretty. I did not play Neely Fuller Jr. at the beginning today with regards to what we're reading in the text at all, because it's early. But man, after we got in the text, I would have played either Fuller talking about that part, Corpus Christi, or I would have just played that part from the film, Trip to Bountiful, reading more important than watching television. Let's see. Make sure I didn't miss any of the folks. *61 if other folks have commentary, thoughts to share. Then I'll get to some of my notes for this section. I also had a number of notes. I said I thought this book was great. We haven't even got to any of the parts that they actually quoted from, shared in the film soundtrack to a coup d'etat. Let's see. I'm going to go back a little bit further. Let's see. Okay, picking up from this week. She says sometimes her mother spoke to her in Sango, the language of her ancestors, sometimes in Lingala, the most common language in the Congo. She told me how proud she was. Now, even I have to stop right there because she had told us last week she doesn't really know any of these languages. She said they don't teach them enough French. They just learn enough so they can be good servants to white people. She talked about what a shame that is, that she is kind of disconnected from her own, and again, willfully. This is a part of it all. That was in the audio clip that I did deliberately play about this is the whole goal of what this is. This is not education. This is the religion of white supremacy racism, and we are teaching you to be obedient slaves. We're not teaching you so you can use your brain computer. We don't even want you to develop physically so you can be strong and physically able. Nah, none of that. None of that. And certainly we don't want you learning anything about who you are, local themes, languages, what your parents ate, talked about, thought was important. None of that. None of that. None of that. You can't even talk to them. Also thought it was important she got all this tactile support. love and hugs and kisses and all of that, and checking her body like we talked about last week to make sure that she was healthy and okay. Why don't you have clothes? Why don't you have undergarments? All of that, as opposed to just being beaten cruelly and starved all the time. This is the part where she goes on to say that she was so proud that she has a white father. Man, color sickness, however you want to frame it, beauty con game, system of white victim of white supremacy. Let's see. She's legally wed to a white man, whatever that means. Victim. Let's see. And again, he does have the power of a white man and her dad, because white man says that the black child can go visit her child rapist. Nothing we can do about it. Even other white people, nothing we can do about it. White man has allowed this. But we will keep tabs on to make sure she doesn't pull anything. Man. The man. Let's see. She says, when my mother laughed, which was often her teeth were sparkling white. I thought that was important too, because so often we get switched over to these horrendous diets in the system of white supremacy, and then have all this tooth decay and horrible not white teeth for non-white people, where you get all this sugar and Oreo cookies and Doritos and the rest of it. But eating natural foods, hey, great teeth. Let's see. Gay here being used to mean happy, as it was at that time period. Let's see. She spoke about her white father with adoration. Same type of thing that we heard, not as much, more so from Essie Mae herself, not as much from her mom, but I mean, some overtones for sure. Let's see. According to the whites' law, a black could not be permitted to disturb the life of a European. Like, man, I would love to see, like, give me that whole statute. What qualifies as disturb? So, like, if I'm riding down the street and I'm playing Master P loud, am I disturbing the life of a European? Like, they would have to break it down to me like, whoa. So that means you can't do no protesting. You definitely can't do no talking about racism. Wow. Corpus Christi Day, that was at the end. So much of this was about white. Like, you can't have white roses in your hair, and you can't have the color. Like, just, wow. Like, even the color white has got to control everything. Let's see. Chapter 3. She says, I have often looked for reasons to forgive my father for placing me in the orphanage. Wow, that's just one sentence. Wow, that's a way to start a chapter. Wow. I have looked for reasons. Now, even that right there, that's suggesting that, woo-wee, I'm going to need some binoculars, magnifying glass, something. How power? Can we get one of them super telescopes? Woo! Man, I'm going to need a search party, searchlight. I'm going to need a lot of equipment to find an excuse, a reason. That would have been the better word if she said a reason, an excuse as to why he dumped me in the end. Hey, why didn't he just leave me with, and I see that would stop everything. Why didn't he just leave? Because it's not, why did he put me in an orphanage? Why did he take me from my mother and family? I don't think you're going to, man, you can get the most powerful telescope in the universe. I don't think you're going to find a good reason for that one. I've tried to, look at that. It's conditional. Both sentences start the same way. I have often looked for reasons to forgive my white father for placing me in the orphanage, period. I have tried to believe that because he married a European woman, he had no alternative. There is a lot of conditional. Come on, man. He's free white and 40. I'm a white man. I do what I want to, man. I'm a white man. I rape children. I do what I want. I steal children. I do what I want to, man. I practice racism in all kinds of ways. What do you mean? I had no alternative, man. You know, I just... Helen leaning on me tough. That's her. Or, excuse me, Henriette. Henriette be leaning on me tough, man. You know, I just can't do nothing with this white woman, man. Victims guaranteed qualify. That, see, that's why I said this reminds me so much of Essie Mae Washington Williams, like so much. Children like me had no place in a conventional European marriage or even European society. Hey, we didn't ask him to take you back home to Europe with him, I don't think. How about just leave you with your mom? How about stop raping children to begin with? How about all that? We didn't ask you to take you, you know, you got to come back. Henriette got to accept you as one of her. Slow down. Like, just stop raping children and or don't steal the children from their child mother. Simple choices, right? There's no doubt in my mind that Henriette was behind the whole plot. She may have feared that as long as I was in the village, my father would have an excuse to return there and spend time with Josephine. I don't think that's why he's coming to hang out with her. I don't think he wants to come and bounce you. It didn't seem like when he came to the orchard, like, oh my goodness, Andrea, come and give me some sugars and kisses, and oh, I just yum, 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 yum. Now maybe she left that out, but that's not what we heard. Her mom did all that. Bring it, let me get you some food, and just all the kisses and miss you and all that. I want some more of that brown sugar. I like raping children, yes. I mean, where's your sister at? She looked nice and tender last time I saw her out. Y'all go do the bath thing? That's why he wants to come visit. I'm not coming to hang out, visit because I like hanging out with my black children. I like raping black children. Come on, man. Come on. She says, and a lot of this putting it off on the white woman, too. I feel like we've heard this a lot before, that the white man doesn't have any agency? Really? Really? She said, once I was safely down the river, I staggered on that one just because, dang, we are on the other side of the planet. Do they use that plantational jargon on the continent too? I thought that was just like Louisiana and Mississippi, and, you know, you get uppity around here in Virginia. All right now, Cletus, we ship you down the river, you wind up picking sugarcane, Louisiana. Yes, I'll be good. That's what I thought that was just it. They've been saying that all over the world. That is down the river. Mess up if you want to. F around and find out. Like, what? What? Oh, my God. You could just study the land. You can't be ignorant about racism and white supremacy because so much of the language is white supremacy, racism, apparently all over the world. Let's continue. She says, they could arrange their lives as they please, talking about white people, without being reminded of an unpleasant past. In yielding to this colonial psychology, my father also served to reinforce it, to perpetuate its evil. This is so passive. This is, how about the easy one? Stop raping children. Victims. Let's see. We already talked about the dangerous idea. They had to humiliate and shame us to quench any spirit among us that might seem ready to draw advantage from this carnal association of black and white. Hold up. Like, how would a black person draw advantage from this carnal association, being raped by a white man? Keep it simple. How? Can you name some people who drew an advantage, whatever that means? They got an extra piece of cornbread, extra bowl of rice, extra pillow, extra piece of corn. You got to tell me something, man. You had to tell me a whole lot, in fact. Like, what? And We've heard this sort of logic before. This is in Half Has Never Been Told. Edward Baptist said the same thing almost verbatim, because I had to switch up my highlight color, that the black people, they could manipulate these rape arrangements and they could get, some privileges or kudos. What? I wouldn't care what you do on the plantation if you're a slave. If you get a few extra victuals, that is not, I manipulated the rape. Like, ooh, he didn't even know, like, I was real seductive that day, and now I got me an extra 2 pounds of chitlins. Man, let's see. We were taught total resignation and submissiveness so that we would not in any way upset the precarious balance of the white man's ship on the already roiling. Wow. Lauren mentioned that one as well, but I mean, dang, even that about the shame, that is such an integral aspect of white supremacy racism. That's why they have so much anti-black content in television and what have you, and resistance to the dolls that even continues to this day, and content that children and people in general are exposed to. Let's see. They weren't taught enough of anything. They were just taught to be good slaves, basically. Says the nuns showed no concern as to whether or not a child was bright. All over the world, if you're intelligent, you are bright. If you're dumb, you are in the dark. Let's see. She gets a blonde doll, of course. Another time she made me miserable with shame. I climbed a tree with some of my friends. Mother Germaine came and ordered us down at once. The others jumped to the ground, but I was clumsy. My dress caught on a branch, and I found myself swinging upside down, unable to free myself. Mother Germaine clapped her hands and called others to see me. My body was quite naked, for we were not lucky enough to have panties then. Again, they don't have adequate clothing. Undergarments are starved, like just basic necessities. And this is in Delectable Negro, white people's ability. Maybe we give you clothes, maybe we don't. Maybe we punish you by removing your clothes. That's a part of the lashings and cachete and all the rest of it. We get to take your clothes away. Maybe we give them back, maybe we don't. And they have a lot of artwork on both continents of black people that are nude or nearly nude being punished by white people, where that seems like that is a part of the punishment. You don't have clothes, we do. We being white people. Let's see. She says the nun's habitual expression was one of discontent and cruelty. She said she was attached to us, but this attachment was that of a vulture to its prey, P-R-E-Y. Even though we've talked all this talk about religion and nuns and all the rest of it, this is the only correct spelling of prey, P-R-E-Y, P-R-E-Y. Let's see. And she's yelling at them to kneel, not the P-R-A-Y pray, but kneel like I'm talking to a dog. Sit. Just all of it is so plantational. And even then, the resistance, then I'll take a few slaps, but I'm resistant, and they see that immediately, like, uh-oh, if we have to go around and slap every black person on the continent, ooh-wee. Now, they killed, that's why I was glad I played some of those audio. They did kill about 10 million black people, so I mean, hey, we will oblige you, but woo, that is driving up the cost of business. How many of them are we going to kill? Are we going to have to kill them all? We want to rape some of them, don't we? Let's see. When I was by myself off to one side, Mother Germaine would say, look at that. See, they even got it in the titles that it's demanded that we call them mother and father. Mother, woo, Mother Superior. Put it that way from the code book. Look at that Belle Bechet sitting there so proud like a European lady. Wow. That right there. We don't like uppity niggers. Like, ooh, you're not supposed to have no black self-respect. Ooh. Ooh. Let's see. Again, her mother pays attention to her physical maturity and development, her bosom, all the rest of it. This is total difference from the nuns. Even these young ladies, they're going through menstrual changes and puberty and all the rest of it, and there's no information, no dialogue. They got the audacity to talk about black people being primitive and ignorant. It seemed like they had an understanding of all of this, and checking even the hey, why don't you have panties? We ain't even got to get to the menstrual stuff. That's important too, but why don't you have panties? WTH. Shut up. Don't look at it. What are you doing? What are you doing? Come on, man. Y'all supposed to be teaching. Oh, I forgot. You're not teaching nothing. You're just teaching them to be better slaves. You can't even be informed about my body. That helps too. We don't want you to be informed about nothing. Least of all who you are. Let's see. That stopped there. I didn't get that said. I took so many notes. The food thing came up as well. She goes to get food, share with the others. We heard snitching, non-white people being encouraged to snitch, because she talked about that last week too. Non-white people being encouraged to snitch on other black people for personal gain. That is all over the known universe, and really that's just basic dynamics of the system of white supremacy. And when you have power over other people, any group of people, hey, we're being terrorized. If I can get a bologna sandwich, bag of potato chips, tube of toothpaste, oh yeah, who you want me to snitch on? Oh yeah, you'll stop beating me? Who I need to snitch on? No problem. Especially you got me in a weak position. That's easy to do. Pause there. We'll get to audio segment number 2. If you did not get to share, write it down, make note, and we'll have more to say. Let's see. We're picking up My Country, Africa, Andrée Blouin, audio segment number 2 in the Katherine Massey Book Club.
Once I had an experience with a man that was devastating to me for the wrong reason. I completely misinterpreted what had happened. Behind the orphanage was a wild, overgrown area where monkeys played in the trees and scrub. Sometimes the monkeys came into our grounds and gathered the fruit that was too high in the trees for us to climb to. We had to watch these chattering creatures carelessly devouring the food for which we were starving. One day, determined to get some of this fruit, I climbed high in one of the trees. There was a military installation next to the grounds, and there was always a man on guard outside its door. When the soldier there saw me looking down into the street, as I always did, yearning to know the life outside, he made an obscene gesture. He opened his fly and took out his penis. I was badly shaken. When I came down from the tree, the other girls asked me what I'd seen. I told them that the soldier had shown me the bread he had in his trousers. It was food, of course, which was always on my mind. His actions seemed terrible to me because I thought he was teasing me. Why would this soldier mock my hunger? It was not until years later that I understood what I had seen. The modesty which the nuns demanded of us put a hideous burden on a girl who was to be married. We were mystified by the example of one of the older girls, Denise. The day before her wedding she was sent to confess to the father at the sacristy. When she came back she was crying. Her face was puffy and red. We were curious to know what had happened, but she would not look at us. Mother Germaine took her aside and talked to her for a long time. She did not sleep with us that night, and she had no more contact with us. The next day she was married, and gone. Later we learned that Mother Germaine had told her, "You must let your husband touch you and do what he wants to you." After all these years of terrified modesty, she was to let an unknown young man do things that were beyond our cruelest dreams of sin. We had only the most fleeting knowledge of what boys were like from the ragging we received in the street on the way to Mass at the cathedral. We enjoyed the week of the Rosary because then we went to the cathedral every day. Only, it just happened that the week of the Rosary was in the rainy season, so we often arrived at the cathedral soaked to the skin. Still, it was worth it. We walked 2 by 2, the métisses in the front of the procession, the black girls from the north behind them, and in the rear, the Bakanga girls. The nuns treated them worst of all, for they really could not bear the Bakongo girls. The girls sat on the right side of the church and the boys from the seminary on the left. If a girl turned her head in the direction of the boys, a nun at once hissed. But occasionally there would be an exchange of glances, and afterward the girl would tell the others excitedly, "He did that." Screwing up one eye in a wink, my God, what do you suppose that means? We had one expulsion from the orphanage, a girl named Anna. One of the younger children was dying of uremia at the hospital, so the nuns sent the older girls in relays to stay with this child, day and night. Anna was one of the girls designated by the Mother Superior for this bedside vigil. One day Anna asked me a curious question. I was a dreamer. I was always doing odd things like making up poetry or inventing songs, so she came to ask me, "Do you know what it means, come, let's make love?" I thought about that. The only love I knew about was the love of God and loving one's neighbor as thyself. My interpretation was way off track. Then she confided in me that when she had gone to watch over the sick child, the hospital orderly, who was very handsome, had said those words to her. I had to admit I didn't know what they meant when a handsome orderly said them. The sick child finally died. A month later Anna was missing. She had gone, on foot, with the orderly to Maya. Today that is where the airport of Brazzaville is, and does not seem so far away, but at that time it seemed an enormous distance. It was easy to find Anna by asking the women who planted manioc and corn in the fields out there if they had seen a métis. Anna was caught and brought back. She was whipped and isolated, and they cut her hair down to the skull. 2 or 3 times a day they questioned her to make her confess what she had done while she was gone. They also questioned us, one by one, to find out what, if anything, Anna had ever said to us. When I repeated her question to me, what a furor that made. What magic did those words contain, I wondered. Later it was explained that they meant to make dirtiness, which was what happened between a man and a woman. It was a mortal sin if one were not married, and repugnant to all good Christians. Actually, Anna had done nothing except to run away with this young man, with whom she was madly in love. But she was sent off to Leopoldville to stay with the nuns of another order, so she would not contaminate us. I was about 14 then. Many elements in Anna's situation troubled me, and I thought about them for a long time. The brave Larine Mukongo prisoners who were led, wailing, past our orphanage walls on the eve of my 8th birthday were to effect important changes within our walls a few years later. Those men in chains were part of a historical process in which the colonized, everywhere, began to lay claim to the human rights that had been denied them for so long. The movement for improved conditions in the French colonies actually began in Indochina in the early 1930s. It spread to Madagascar, and then, contagiously to the mainland of Africa, where it became increasingly strong. In our so-called school, we did not study African history. We girls had no idea that the prisoners who chanted, "We want to be French citizens, we want to be French citizens," were following the lead of another French colony, Senegal, where, in 1915, under Blaise Diagne, citizenship had been granted to the people of the 4 communes. Actually, this citizenship did not give the Senegalese rights equal to the French in their country, but it did confer upon them special privileges. Those who received it were permitted to go to cafes and cinemas patronized by the whites, and they were entitled to wages that were a little higher than those in other areas, who remained simply French subjects. In return for this citizenship, with its military obligations, they also received tickets for certain food products during the war, and even the famous card for quinine, which was reserved exclusively for Europeans in other French colonies in Africa. The few privileges of this second-class citizenship, however, were quite beyond the imagination of the administrators in French Equatorial Africa. Their answer to the people's demand for citizenship was the whip, the gun, and imprisonment. This colonial obstinacy was to make thousands of children orphans. Its grief extends to this day, a terrible page in the history of Africa. Isolated in our ignorance, we girls knew nothing about current events. We were quite unaware of the rumbles of war in Europe, still less of how such a war might affect our anonymous lives. Spain was already torn with civil strife. France was apprehensive about its future, suspecting the hostilities with Germany that were to begin in 1939. At the Ministry of Colonies, which regarded Africa as part of France's military reserves, it was suggested that giving citizenship to certain elements of the restless populations would be a means of ensuring loyal cannon fodder for the front line if, as was expected, war should be declared. With great fanfare in the press, it was announced in 1937 that relations between France and her colonies were being strengthened. Citizenship, of a kind, would generously be granted to that manageable hybrid, the person of mixed blood. The nuns of the orphanage were informed that we girls were to receive this citizenship. The condition of this privilege, however, was that the name of the White Father, particularly if he were a government official, be renounced. If the father were not in the government, a change or mutilation of the name might be tolerated. It was in the dining hall one morning at our usual meager breakfast of a small serving of manioc with some salt that Mother Gonzaga made the announcement to us. After first bidding us to be duly grateful, she explained the change in our civil state which was being made possible for us. We were told that we should decide on the name that we wanted our legal documents to bear. The idea of being given a choice in something, especially in a matter as important as this, created great feeling among us girls, after having had no rights for so long. Some of my companions found the idea of a new name great fun and made a fanciful game of it. But I couldn't laugh. I took the event very seriously. Far from comforting me, this improvement in my official status actually gave me great pain. It only served to remind me of how I had been torn away from my mother and deposited at the orphanage like a sort of lost article. I cried in my bed for a long time, more than ever wretchedly sad and humiliated. Some of the girls decided to take their mother's name, but there were about a half a dozen of us who wanted, at whatever cost, to keep the name of our fathers. When the Mother Superior heard of this, she was extremely perturbed. She called us into her office and lectured us on the error of such a choice. "You mustn't ask for such a thing, my children. To be granted French citizenship is already an enormous concession. You simply must not put into jeopardy your father's private life or work. Some of them are married and have families. Think of the quarrels it might produce. Think of how their legitimate children might feel. Important concerns to us cast-offs, indeed. Some of the others were persuaded, but I was not. I insisted that I would use my father's name. For this I was severely reprimanded and warned that my citizenship might not be granted. At last the memorable day came when we were to be registered as French citizens, with the name of our choice. For the occasion we were taken to the city hall. There, seated at a long table, wearing their most official expressions, were the members of the Civil Affairs Commission, the judge, the police commissioner, the mayor, and a registry clerk, Jacques Opengalt, whom I was to meet again when he became the first chief of state of the ex-French Congo. We were called, one by one, to stand before the commission and to state the name by which we wished to be known. When it was my turn, I announced in a voice that was strong, even defiant, that I would keep the name of my father. Then, as if ashamed of my concession, I dropped my voice and added, without the T. The mayor, who was presiding, frowned. There was a moment of silence as he looked hard at me. I waited, holding my breath. I had always had a good relationship with Mother Elise, who was in charge of the orphanage infirmary. She let me help her in her work, which I enjoyed. It interested me to learn to care for the girls who had small accidents or became ill. From her I acquired some rudimentary ideas about hygiene and first aid. Now she spoke up for me. "Monsieur the Mayor," she said, "this girl is in a particularly difficult situation. She was placed with us by her father, who lives in Ubangwishari. Because her African family is so far away, she is unable to see them, as the other girls do. She is of a thoughtful nature. I would say she has suffered because of being without visits from her relatives. I believe that she should have special consideration. Besides," she pointed out encouragingly, "her father is not in the government." My body trembled as I watched the mayor's face. Abruptly he nodded, then signed. Thus, in Judgment No. 20 on September 11, 1937, French citizenship was awarded to Andrée Madeleine Jabila, without a T. I was permitted to use my father's name, in a mutilated form. 6 years later my father, who was divorced, recognized me and authorized me to use my maiden name with a T. But by then I was already married and the mother of 2 children. Chapter 4. Flight to a New Life. It was not enough that the nuns controlled every aspect of our existence, from our ignorant, frightened minds as children to our prudish, submissive ways as adolescents. The nuns aspired to manage our futures even after we left the orphanage, through the simple device of arranging our marriages. The evil of our mixed blood, it was easy to see, should not be allowed to do further damage to the fabric of the colonialist society by mingling with that of either the blacks or the whites. The female of mixed blood was seen as a particular threat to the order of the system. It would not be good for black men to have access to lighter-skinned women. It would make them uppity and harder to govern. If the white male had already proved vulnerable to the seductions of the black female, the métis was even more dangerous to him. And what was to be done with the offspring of a white and a métis? Why, one might not even be able to distinguish its having black blood. Clearly, such situations should not be allowed to develop. The girls of mixed blood, then, should be married to men of mixed blood so that the confusion should go no further. The problems of their special appearance, their special psychology, and their potentially dangerous aspirations after being blessed with a youth in the care of the mission and learning a little French, must be carefully contained. 1 kilometer away from us was an orphanage for boys of mixed blood that was run by the mission of the Fathers of the Holy Ghost. It was with someone from this pool of outcasts like ourselves that we should be united. When the fathers of the mission had a young man whom it seemed advisable to marry off, they proposed his name to the nuns, who found a suitable candidate for him among their older girls. When the couple had been agreed upon by both orders, the day was set for the young people to meet. This event took place in the parlor of St. Joseph and St. Mary. The straight chairs were set in a row and there was a white doily lying on the table in the middle of the room. The girl was seated on one side of the Mother Superior and the young man, scrubbed clean, his pants in pleats sharp as an accordion, on the other. The Mother Superior asked a few questions of each of them, how many times a week they went to Mass or Catechism, where their parents lived. Then, without further tiresome conversation, she stated the purpose of the occasion. To the girl she said, "My daughter, this is your fiancé. Now that you are 17 years old it is time for you to be married. This young man is a good Christian. It is up to you to be a good wife to him and a good mother to your family." To the young man she offered the same genre of sound advice, then concluded, "Shall we set the marriage date 3 months from now?" Usually the young girl was so terrified by the event that she could hardly raise her eyes to look at this phenomenon, a young male, the man with whom the rest of her life was to be entwined. And avid though she was to stare at him, such an uncommon sight were young men in our lives, she sometimes became engaged hardly knowing what her proposed husband looked like. If the girl was lucky, she might see her young man on 2 more occasions before they were wed, although always in the parlor, under the vigilant eye of the Mother Superior. During the months that followed, preparations were made for the marriage. The older girls helped the betrothed to sew what was ostentatiously referred to as the trousseau of the bride. It was traditional that the young man should buy some cloth for his fiancée. From this she made an embroidered tablecloth and napkins. He also bought the fabric for her wedding dress, which she made herself. A small suitcase with some nightgowns, dishcloths, and sheets was considered a fine trousseau. The initials of the couple were elaborately embroidered on all the household linens, in imitation of the haughtiest bourgeois customs. Uniting these two like aberrations of the species, however, did not provide all the necessary safeguards against their potential for disrupting the order of things. Their presence, as a couple, a kind of third species in this black and white society, tended to present questions without comfortable answers. Obviously, the best thing would be to keep all of this third species together and removed, for the most part, from the rest of the system. This, it was decided, could be done by creating a special village for them. The French government had turned over a large piece of undeveloped land at some distance from Brazzaville to the mission of the Fathers of the Holy Ghost. There, in the middle of a wasteland of tall coarse grass and a few trees, the Fathers made a clearing and constructed, as a beginning, for small houses. The clearing was connected with the town by one lonely footpath. This place was known as the village of Saint Firmin, after Monseigneur Firmin Guichard, whose diabolical plan it was to keep the couples of mixed blood under the surveillance of the Catholic missions forever. I was about 10 years old when I first saw a marriage of this kind, arranged through the machinations of the holy orders. After the ceremony we girls were taken to see the House of Happiness, where the young couple was to live. It was an ugly brick building of 2 rooms and a roof of corrugated iron. I found the whole place repellent and shuddered to think of those young people, sequestered in that solitude. Even when they had left the orphanages and were ready to found their own families, still they were not free. I swore that this would not be my fate. I would choose my own husband and make a home only with love. In the years that followed I saw several more of these made-to-order marriages of the missions, and each of them only served to strengthen my resolve. When we visited the village, the women looked miserable. They always had their eyes down in front of their husbands. Perhaps they looked at each other when we were not there, but it seemed to me that they were just enduring that wretched life. One evening when I was 15 years old, the Mother Superior called Meadow. "A young man is asking to marry you," she announced. "You should be very pleased. He has heard about you and has decided that it is you and no other that he wishes for his wife." "But mother," I answered, "I'm too young. I don't want to be married." "You are quite right," said the Mother Superior smoothly. "And that is why the arrangement is perfect. This young man is going to Chad as a veterinarian aide, but before he leaves he wants to become engaged. You have only to promise to wait for him for 4 years. Then you will be 19, which will be quite suitable." I listened, appalled, as she spoke of this young man with the brilliant future for whom I had only to wait and pray for 4 years. "You are very fortunate because this young man is of an exemplary character. It seems that he is a good worker and extremely pious. He goes to Mass faithfully not only on Sundays but on days of the week, too. His name is Luc Paquetos," she added, as if that should complete all I could possibly want to know about my future husband. Mother Superior's tones, her gestures, had the final air of a business well concluded. At last she paused for the meek "Yes, mother," that was customary and would seal the affair. "I am sorry, mother, but my answer is no," I said firmly. "I cannot become engaged to him." "What do you mean, no?" Mother Superior lifted her chin indignantly. "You have here an honorable offer of marriage. Of course you will accept it." "I do not want to become engaged to this man. I don't want to become engaged at all." "My child, you know nothing about life. Such an opportunity may never come again. Think how you would feel if you were never to be married, never to have children. It would be abnormal. Perhaps my life will be abnormal, but I cannot agree to this engagement." Mother Superior was extremely provoked by my attitude and made every effort to persuade me that I should accept. But I would not. I was to have a number of other offers of marriage during the succeeding years which I rejected in the same way. I had seen how unhappy these forced unions were, and I resolved to not let the nuns bully me into one of them. After all these years with the nuns I was convinced that they were the last to know or care where my real happiness lay. I had no idea what the future of a métisse like myself should be, no real image of what to hope for, or aspire to. But the methods of the nuns, from what I knew of them, should be no part of it. I was determined to forge my own future, however good or bad that might turn out to be. By 1938 my life with the nuns had become intolerable. At 17, more than ever I was of a proud, combative temperament. I was considered the rebel of the institution, the likely source of whatever disciplinary problems arose. The only fate in sight for me was an arranged marriage. I was afraid I might not be able to resist the nuns' intrigues indefinitely. Whatever the price, I decided, I must get away from the orphanage. I made plans to escape. I discussed my plans with my two best friends, Louisa and Madeline, who were also unhappy enough, I thought, to make the break with me. Louisa was the oldest. She knew that she could not hold out against a forced marriage much longer and often cried in dread of this. Madeline, she was number 19 at the orphanage and had been deposited there just shortly before me. I had really hated when we were younger. It was she who taunted me, wearing my father's dress and shoes. But later we made it up, and I knew that, like me, she wanted desperately to flee. The three of us agreed to make the unheard of break together. Mother Germaine, we learned, was to return to the mother house in Europe in 2 weeks. Even the prospect of relief offered by getting rid of her, the cause of so much of our misery, did not change our plans. We decided, in fact, to use her departure to help us in our escape, to profit by the confusion that this extraordinary event would create. After all those years of grief under her, at last Mother Germaine would be useful to us. Permission was given for all the girls to go to the train station and see Mother Germaine off. This was already a great concession and a change in our routine. We knew it was that day or never. It was impossible to escape during the night when everyone was asleep, as the windows of the bedrooms were barred and the bedroom doors were locked by the guardian nuns who hung the keys on a board in their room. The gate of the orphanage was kept heavily locked. We would have to go over the walls that had kept us prisoners so long. The day of the departure was one of great turmoil and emotion. The girls were crying, it was weeping for the devil, but even a change for good can provoke a sense of malaise, loss, and wailing. She's leaving, she's leaving. Mother Germaine was embracing everyone. A very special atmosphere existed. Madeline, Louisa, and I acted out our roles and wailed with the rest. Profiting by the license and disorder of the day, as soon as we got back from the train station, the three of us slipped out of the building and into the garden. We had already hidden the little bundles of personal things that we wanted to take with us among the branches of the thorny lemon trees. Twilight comes early and quickly in the tropics, and after 7 o'clock it was already dark. In the garden I led the way, following paths that, after 14 years, I knew all too well. I squeezed my friends' hands hard. I knew by their trembling that they were frightened to death. We found our little bundles of possessions, as planned, but we could not go over the wall there because the police station, with officers on guard outside in little huts of straw, was directly on the other side. Behind the kitchen was a guava tree that leaned over the wall toward the street of Paradise. Feeling for branches in the eerie gloom, I climbed and they followed. We lowered ourselves onto the wall. The bottle shards along its top immediately cut our hands and feet. We began to bleed. I looked down into the street for a good place to jump. There were no street lights or cars, so we had only to be sure that no one was walking past. It was totally black below and the wall seemed fearfully high. Behind us was the detested garden, before us the unknown. Squatting there on the top of the wall, the broken glass slashing our feet, we steeled ourselves for the jump. Madeline and Louisa began to cry. "It's too high," Madeline whimpered. "I'm scared." "We can't do it. We'll be killed," sobbed Louisa. "I'm going back." I had no alternative. Ignoring their protests, I pushed Madeline, then Louisa, and jumped after them. We landed on the hard dirt below without being too badly hurt. Limping and leaving bloody traces behind us, we took our first steps toward freedom at last. Louisa had told us we could find shelter at the home of her cousin, Martha, who herself had been raised at the orphanage and married through the good offices of the Mother Superior. However, Martha and her husband had managed to escape being confined in St. Firmin, and lived in a little house in the native village of Poto Poto. I did not think for a moment of turning to my father, whom I had not seen since his half-hour visit when I was 8 years old. As a matter of form, and to salve their consciences, the nuns required that each girl write one carefully supervised letter a year to her white father. This I faithfully did. During my 14 years in the orphanage I had received 1, perhaps 2 letters, in return. My ideas about life outside the orphanage therefore did not in any way involve my unknown father, who, I could only suppose, would be furious at my running away. Since he had placed me there, mustn't he support its principles? Martha received us with kindness, and that first night I slept not under a sheet but an immense, colorful African cloth. It seemed wonderful to me. At last I was to know my Africa. The next day, we had to remain in hiding, although we were longing to go out and see the world. We knew that the police, summoned by the Mother Superior, would be looking everywhere for us. To make a clean break with our past of submission and obedience, we cut our hair. My hair was very long, down to my hips, like a skirt. We didn't have a razor blade, so we did the job with a piece of broken bottle, badly. The fashion then, according to the gravure magazines we had seen, was to wear one's hair short and combed straight back, behind one's ears. We shaved the back of our necks with broken glass, too. It was frightfully done, but it was proof of our freedom, an irrevocable step of defiance. For years we had worn our hair always in the same way, parted in the middle, the sides plastered down, and a flat chignon in back. It had been a torment to us. Now our hair looked terrible, raggedly short as it was, but at least we were no longer marked by its style as belonging to the orphanage. All day we remained indoors. In the evening we could bear the confinement no longer. We went walking in the quarter, lit only by the flickering lights of the little cooking fires, or a kerosene lantern, where a family was gathered on a mat in the yard. Each hut was set off in its own yard with a tiny, rickety, imperialistic fence. Even in this poverty there was a high sense of, this is mine, poor as it is, let no one intrude on my poverty. As the houses did not have kitchens, the cooking was done on wood fires outside. Around us we could hear people doing their chores, laughing and talking in the warm evening air. It was so different from the orphanage, where everything was foreseen, regimented, stale, and sad. Here, we were seeing real life at last. The sight of a métisse always aroused comment and questions. 3 métisses could not go unnoticed. The next day a group of police encircled Martha's house, and without bothering to ascertain if we would come out peaceably, broke down the door. We 3 girls were arrested and led off like criminals to the City Hall of Brazzaville. It was the mayor, himself, who questioned us. I want the truth from you, my children. Why did you run away from the orphanage? The most important man in Brazzaville was calling us to AC count. Madeline and Louisa were tongue-tied, shaking with fear. I had to answer for the 3 of us. Sir, we couldn't bear to stay there anymore. We were too unhappy. This was my chance. Unsparingly I described the torments, the humiliations that comprised our lives. I pointed out the ragged dresses we were wearing that, in fact, were a disgrace. I bared one shoulder and showed him the lashes from a whipping I had received earlier. Worst of all, I pled, they're always telling us that we will go to hell because we have inherited our father's sinfulness and our mother's primitive nature. How can we live in such misery? The mayor listened with an intent air. I brought out the ultimate proof of our desperation. We are determined not to return to the orphanage, sir. If you send us back, here I paused for the full effect, we have taken an oath. Each of us will kill herself. A strange expression passed over the mayor's face. Later I was to learn that he had fathered a son by a black woman and had given this boy to the fathers of the Holy Ghost to raise.
the whole world as the white man's brothel. I didn't father a child with a black female. Probably a child, 13-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old. I've been doing the same thing. Dang. Katherine, Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. We'll pick up here next week. Now, again, nothing that we have read was in the movie that I loved. We are 4 chapters deep, and it's still... I heard this read in the theater and was stunned, but I didn't hear nothing that we've heard thus far. Patrice Lumumba is a-coming, but that's like way down the road. Number to dial, 605-313-5164. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email, untiljustice@gmail.com. Let us know if you have thoughts, observations. Let us see. We did not hear first time around. Victim in New Jersey. If you have thoughts on, now we've had 2 weeks of reading, should be with us. We'll hear from Lauren as well.
Hey, Gus, I'm just going somewhere where it's quiet. The part where, she was in a tree and a soldier flashed his penis. And then just on the last words where this mayor, I don't know if it was the mayor speaking or it was the author, when he said, the lustful father and the primitive mother. Whipping your penis out at a child, I would argue that that's more primitive than anything. So that struck me. And I'm just kind of wondering, how long does it take for somebody to have amnesia, to forget their past, to forget their culture, to forget their civilization? Because we're so often reminded through history of the greatness of Africa. But I keep hearing the Congolese captives expressing how they want to be French citizens. Not that they actually want freedom, and this is no shaming or blaming at all. Not that they want their civilization back, that they want their culture back, that they want to be French citizens. And foolishly, I hear, it just reminds me of the chatter online, American blacks versus African blacks, and just reading this book and knowing the American experience and learning more about the African experience, it makes that argument that much more ridiculous. Just the yearning to have her father's last name. It is understood. She is a child. That white man is her father. So just human, just human nature. You yearn for family. You yearn for acceptance. No fault of hers. But the confusion that union that those white men inflicted on those captives, because they are captives, just by the use of their penis and the transfer of their semen into their captives. breeding a confused offspring. It's I don't know. It's just kind of, you know, it's kind of depressing, honestly. I'll close. I might have some more to share later on.
Much obliged, victim in New Jersey. I think we did talk about this last week in terms of wanting to be a French citizen, and we were saying, Lauren, some of the others, we were saying they wanted to not be mistreated by white people. That's really what it is. It's the mistreatment. Maybe this way we won't have to be raped by white children and all the rest of it. Do you think that's what they're getting at in wanting this French citizenship?
Oh, yes. I mean, you know, but definitely. But words are important, and you know, words are very powerful. So again, you know, VGQ. But if we are talking about justice and just basically trying to bring, how can I say, balance and justice on the planet, you know, even in captivity, you know, I mean, you don't want to be mistreated, but it's like, what are they, or what are people of melanated skin on the planet really fighting for? You know what I mean? Are we fighting for justice on the planet, or do we just want to be accepted by white people? If the goal is just to basically not be mistreated and to be treated like Frenchmen, like Americans, like Britishman, then we're not going to solve this problem. But that's just the consequences of the confusion, and it is caused by the mistreatment.
Lots of confusion. For sure. I know, man, you will get a good beating. You go around here talking about, what is he talking about? You not with us and being a proud African American, and you don't tolerate all these pretend black people. Like, wait a minute now, you get a good beating for that, or at least be called a coon for a little while. Any hoodles. I was thinking, he said ridiculous. I was thinking pitiful, but you know, same thing when you get down to it. Much obliged, victim in New Jersey. Let's see. Other folks, if you have commentary to share, *61 on the, I guess, second or first portion of the read. Let's see. Lauren should be with us as well, if you have commentary on the second portion.
Yes, sir, I do. Thank you for allowing me to speak. So the person who pulled out, the male who pulled out his penis, I didn't think that was a black person. She said there was a military installation next to the grounds, and there was always a man on guard outside its door. I thought the guard was going to be a white person, since the people in the prison were classified as non-white, black. And then she said she thought it was bread when she saw the penis. Like, I just thought what French bread looks like. It's a pretty light color. I don't know. That's probably really close to the color of a white penis, or at least a lighter skinned black person. So I did not think that was a non-white person who did that. I thought it was sad though. Like, it's kind of good that she didn't notice that it was a penis, but she was so hungry, all she could think of was bread. It said that they had a classmate. She keeps calling it an orphanage. It's probably more accurately a boarding school, but one of the classmates had uremia. I actually had to Google that, and it's a condition involving abnormally high levels of waste products in the blood. It says it's a dangerous condition that occurs when the kidneys no longer filter properly, and it's likely to occur when a person is in the final stage of chronic kidney disease. So it's a student at the school. So many health problems around there because they're being mistreated, not fed properly. Even Miss Blouin has the anemia, and she had the parasites and stuff when she went to the doctor last time. The little girl Anna who goes with the orderly to Maya, and when she gets back, she doesn't know what this means to make love. And when the nuns hear this phrase to make love, she said it was explained that they meant to make dirtiness, which was what happened between a man and a woman. It was a mortal sin if one were not married and repugnant to all good Christians. Wow. This, I've thought about this before. I probably haven't talked about it on here. White people and words. It's so interesting. It really shows what their values are. The words they think of as profane, like just this to make love. I was thinking of the word fuck. I know that wasn't in the book, but people act like that's a curse word, but engaging in sexual intercourse is how you produce people. So that's how you produce other life. War isn't a curse word, and that's death making, and it seems terrible when you think about it. So, and just that, I don't know. It seems I'm having difficulty coming up with a word for it, but incorrect to think of it that way. The citizenship, I don't know. I don't have comments together for it, but it was interesting. Let me see. The female of mixed blood was seen as a particular threat to the order of the system. It would not be good for black men to have access to lighter-skinned women. It would make them uppity and harder to govern. If the white male had already proved vulnerable to the seductions of the black female, the Matisse was even more dangerous to him. And what was to be done with the offspring of a white and a Matisse? Why, one might not even be able to distinguish as having black blood. Clearly, such situations should not be allowed to develop. That seems to be a very big fear for white people, that it's going to be non-white people around them, and they won't even know they're non-white people. They'll be looking and acting, functioning as white people, like a white person's nightmare. Let me see. Just, and all of the entire time they're at this boarding school / prison, whatever, they're not, it just doesn't seem like they're being prepared to be anything except slaves. They're not being prepared to function, as mothers. I guess we're not supposed to function properly as mothers or wives. So that explains that. But when she doesn't want to get married, the nun tells her, think how you would feel if you were never to be married, never to have children. It would be abnormal, ! The person telling her this is not married and does not have children. That was ironic. I was glad that she had enough nerve to say no when they came to her with these so-called marriage proposals, or you're going to get married and this is who you're going to get married to. She said no, and she said it more than once. And I think it took bravery for her to do that, because she had a lot of mistreatment in that place. And, all of the training was to do what they say and not go against what these white people tell her to do. And when they got ready to escape, the glass that was on top of the wall, how did that get there? Was that there? Was it put there on purpose in case someone tried to escape? their feet would be cut. I was thinking about that. And it said when Mother Germaine was leaving and they were going to the train station, the way everyone was acting, the girls were crying, they were weeping, and it said, but even a change for good can provoke a sense of malaise, loss, and wailing. And they were like, she's leaving, exclamation mark. That confused me kind of. I didn't know what to make of it, but there was a section, though, where, because I've been thinking, like, this seems like a prison. Somebody has probably said it, probably Gus or someone else, but it was actually called that. She said permission was given for all the girls to go to the train station to see Mother Germaine off. This was already a great concession and a change in our routine. We knew it was that day or never. It was impossible to escape during the night when everyone was asleep, as the windows of the bedrooms were barred and the bedroom doors were locked by the guardian nuns who hung the keys on a board in their room. The gate of the orphanage was kept heavily locked. I don't even know what heavily locked means. We would have to go over the walls that had kept us prisoners for so long. So right then, she called it an orphanage, I think, but then she called herself and her the two girls who were with her, she referred to them as prisoners. They got, the two other girls, they got scared. I think if Andrea wasn't there to push them, they might have went back. I'm not sure it made a difference. I don't know if they had to go back to the school, but white people did locate them. And let me see. Yeah, and I don't even know if they had talked about it, but saying, that they were determined not to return to the orphanage, giving some details, definitely not enough. I think there should have been more details about the mistreatment. But she said they'd taken an oath that each of them will kill themselves if they have to go back. I think that was actually kind of smart, and I hope it works out. And that's all I have for right now.
Get free, die trying. I guess 50 Cent would have worked right there as well. It did seem like they were going to turn back, I guess. One of them said, yeah, I'm going to turn back. It's scary. We're dipping. Deuces. And Miss Blouin's, nope, going forward, they probably would have. And that seems like it's often the case on the plantation, where you get non-white people who get afraid, and it is scary. They're young children. Like, yeah, it's kind of frightening. I can see how it might be a little bit daunting to do. And then they got glass obstacles and everything on the walls so you can't get out, and bars on the walls, and Jiminy Crickets. Like, man, it's daunting. It would be scary. I'd be scared if I was an adult person, much less trying to get through all that. So, and then you're going to be punished if you get caught. So, yeah, it's a lot to be afraid of, for sure. Much obliged, Lauren. Let me see. Star 61. Other folks, if they have commentary to share. Let me see if I can get through the rest of our email. Let me see. Okay, picking up number 11, page 50 to 511. Noticed without grasping why that whenever two girls were 12, we want to be French citizens. We were following the lead of another French colony, Senegal, where in 1915 under Blaise Diagne, I think it's Diagne, West African birth, first African to become a member of the French Chamber of Deputies, French Parliament, adopted as a child by the Crespian family, who were considered of mixed race. Does that mean one white parent, one non-white parent? He has it in quotes. Studied in France, he was known for and later criticized for his advocacy for a continued African role in France as opposed to a complete rejection of colonialism. He was a strong advocate for equal rights for Africans, which also garnered him a lot of opposition and criticism from the French whites. His son Raoul was the first black man to play professional football in France. Probably had bananas thrown at him all the time. Chapter 4, page 57. The female of mixed blood was a particular threat to the order of the system. Lauren read, could not be good for a black man, get uppity, blah, blah, blah. Still trying to process the author's analysis. Now, my interpretation is that this is the author telling us about the system, not like this is my personal thought on why this shouldn't happen or whatever. I think this is her giving white people's analysis of why this shouldn't happen. Let's see, Lauren, now you pointed out this passage specifically. Lauren, did you think this was Miss Blouin's analysis of this situation with the dangers of the female of mixed blood, or did you think she was just kind of telling us white people's analysis, how they see this as a threat?
I thought she thought that that was the concern that white people had.
Okay, I'm with you. I'm with you. She thought this is what white people think about all this. Gotcha. So I'm going back to what the email. Still trying to process the author's analysis. Does having a population of mixed bloods strengthen or weaken the global system of racism, white supremacy? I think in many respects it strengthens it by promoting racial confusion among its victims. Agree. I think Lauren talked about that point about the racial classification confusion with non-white people last week. But I do think specifically especially when she goes into more detail about white people, I think she says it then, this wasn't her concern, this is white people's concern that, we might, or let's even go back to the uppity black people, like, oh man, they get around and get one of these high yeller women and thinking she close to white and that I'm supposed to be dignified and got my chest puffed out and all the rest of it. Ooh, she might, have some goodies, know how to speak a little bit better because she has a white parent, and get all highfalutin and thinking I'm something. And ooh, you're supposed to be humiliated. Nothing. Get away from mine. I might want to rape her. Get away from that high yellow woman. And then, much less, when he says that white people might get confused. Some of them look darn near white. Oh, I've heard that before. Man, white people saying we get these Obamas and they got whole books, movies. We talked about that with Dr. Kevorkian. Like, y'all mess around and we get too much and we can't even figure out. They act like they want to pass and sneak off and like, man, I've seen that from white people. So I'm not saying necessarily that you would have a situation where white people raping these black people is going to jeopardize, but I do hear that as a consistent threat amongst white people. They're not able to distinguish amongst their niggers. Let's see, 2. Page 58. Whom it seemed advisable to many off, they proposed his name to the nuns who found a suitable candidate for him among their older girls, creating a special village for them, a diabolical plan, keep them under surveillance forever. A sophisticated form of social engineering breed into the African population offspring who are raised by women indoctrinated into the system. I think that's what they've been talking about, most of what we have read thus far in terms of programming. Not like Lauren said that we're not really teaching them anything other than to be good slaves. They'll be obedient to white people. They don't even know their own language. So we're just, meaning local native languages, we're just teaching them how to obey white people and whatever rudimentary skills they would, sewing, that sort of thing, so that they'll be good to take care and entertain us, right? Seemed like they enjoyed the dancing. We heard about that last week. Seemed like that was cool too. Let's see. To think that for 14, oh, and stop. We didn't get that far. We'll stop right there. Let's see. I will get some, pulled the wrong book up. There we go. Get some of the notes I have for the second section, going back to chapter 3. Great point Lauren made as well. The term reminded me so much of Dr. Welsing in terms of fuck and the original motherfucker, in terms of what is seen as obscene sexual intercourse. The act that populates the planet is obscene, explicit, dirty. And in fact, she talks about that. You got to cover hide your shame. You're showing your genitals and your nude, pale flesh. She talks about that all in the ISIS papers. And black people, non-white people, not seeming to have those same sorts of hang-ups about nudity, sexual activity, all of that. Let's see. Let me see. I'm trying to make sure I don't go back too far in part 3. Okay. They didn't let black people sit together in church. Religion of White Supremacy. Let's see. Lauren had already talked about the bathing or lack thereof. It doesn't even seem like a bath. It seems like washing kind of with a sink or a rag or something of that sort. Like, would be a bit much to call it a bath. Let's see. I don't know if my original thinking was this is a white person or a black person who's holding the penis, but if it's a soldier with a rifle, they probably wouldn't give a black person a gun at this point. But then for sure, when she said that loaf of bread, because she's so hungry, white person. That's what I think, that this is a white person who's sexually molesting her, basically, at this young age. And even that she is so hungry, again, delectable Negro, that this comes up all the time, where everything, I'm hungry, I'm starving. Everything is about food or the lack thereof. Let's see. The next day, she's married. Later, we learned that Mother Germaine had told her, "You must let your husband touch you and do what he wants to you." After all these years of terrified modesty, she was to let an unknown young man do things that were beyond our cruelest dreams of sin. All this is just designed for like catastrophe, racism, set up for child rapists. Like, hush up, you just do what you're told. Except, like, what? He's 45. I'm 15. Wait a minute. Let's see. I didn't know what Uremia was either. This case is words, places, lots that I'm ignorant about reading this here text. Let's see. Let's see. They whipped her and cut her hair down to the skull for trying to run away. That's why I said there's penalties for escaping. So that would be something to consider. Like, man, I don't know. I'm going back. Did you see what they did? They cut all her hair off and she's going around bald, and they whipped her. One or the other, it seemed, would be sufficient. No, we got to do both. Man. Let's see. Leopoldville, they take over all these areas and name them after white people. Let's see. The movement to improve conditions in French colonies actually began in Indochina in the early 1930s. It spread to Madagascar and then contagiously, that's the word that I used before, to the mainland of Africa, where it became increasingly strong. France had so many so-called colonies, areas where they were mistreating, terrorizing non-white people all over the world. And in fact, Planet of the Apes, since I mentioned Autobiography and him being placed in the monkey cages, Planet of the Apes was written when they lost Vietnam, part of Indochina, their French colony. And woe is us, the world is falling apart, the Negroes are taking over. And they were losing Algiers on the continent at the same time, lots of their so-called areas. France Fanon's time period a few years later. Let's see. The Ministry of Colonies, this is 1939, regarded Africa as part of the France's military reserves. It was suggested that giving citizenship to certain elements of the restless populations would be means of ensuring loyal cannon fodder for the front line if, as was expected, war should be declared. Neely Fuller Jr. talks about this all the time. In fact, the films that I mentioned, most of them revolve around World War II and how much that destabilized and changed the global system of white supremacy racism. And this is a part of it right here. We got restless niggers, and we can't go and bash all them down and go deal with Hitler at the same time. Like, oh my goodness, well, we have to give some concessions. Fuller talks about that all the time, and saying that this, and Hitler even predicted that, like, this is going to totally mess up the plantation, and it did. All kinds of ways messed up things. Let's see. She says, with great fanfare in the press, it was announced in 1937 that relations between France and her colonies were being strengthened. Citizenship of a kind would generously be granted to manage able hybrid, the person of mixed blood. Now, I thought this was important because I'd said last week that white people make a distinction between individuals who are classified as not white, who have one white parent. They make a distinction and saying, you know, hey, this isn't old Leroy, so, you know, hey, maybe we give them an extra donut or whatever the case may be. I mean, wow, I did not expect it to get this elaborate, even though I've heard this sort of thing before, and you get colored and all the rest of it. But I mean, wow, that is quite a bit. That we're going to give out citizenship, which is enormous. Like, that is all kinds of privileges, and you get to do this and you get to do that, and maybe you get better money and all the rest. You get to keep your hands. I mean, there's all kinds of things that go with that. It's going to be the non-white people who have a white parent. Like, wow, that is, having a white person as a parent can be a powerful distinction between just being a non-white person. Let's see. And then to get the citizenship, you got to give up your dad's name. You can't be embarrassing a good white man who's got legitimate white children. Behave, bastardize your name, change your letter, or make a new one, whatever. But don't be, you know, you can't be walking around like, hey, are you Strom Thurmond's? No, that's, it don't have nothing to do with Strom Thurmond, not at all. Let's see. He said, think of the quarrels it might produce. Think about who has legitimate children. I'm like, what? What does that even mean? What? I'm supposed to legitimize my illegitimacy from him raping up my black mother child. You right. He got legitimate white children. You right. Let me go on and make up some. Leroy Sharpton. Is that taken? I'm going to be Leroy. I'm French, so it'll be Leroy. L-E. Capital R-O-I, Leroy. Let's see. I guess we did our full time. I can leave it there. She'd even have the orphanage for boys of mixed blood. Like, what? Is this another dumping spot for the white men who have raped black children? How much of the whole world as the white man's brothel? We'll leave it there. The Matisse, they got so much of that. Oh, we talked about the uppity and the Matisse. I'm going to see if they got information about all of this specifically, because this is so intricate and detailed that there has to be like books about this program. Where's this place? Like, who worked here? Who was at this specific orphanage? All of that detail I would love to see. If I can find some of that, I'll share between now and next Thursday. Any hoodles. We'll be here tomorrow, Friday, neutralizing workplace racism, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, and then Saturday, compensatory call-in. Much obliged for folks tuning in, hopefully worthy of your Thursday evening. Sobriety would be best. We need folks who are courageous, like Miss Blouin. Like, I'm out of here. Like, I'm not half-stepping and pussyfooting. We are out of here. No turning back. Sobriety would be best, so we have black self-respect and then high-functioning, well-working brain computers. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people victims of white supremacy, we ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. No name-calling black people. No gossiping. No throwaway offspring. Got gobs of that right here. Throwaway black children by the heaps. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. Yeah. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.